Years ago, a powerful force warped space and time. This caused an invasion of beings from another world. The monsters wiped out humanity at will. This soon led to a drastic population decline. Those who survived this apocalypse called it the Magic Dawn, and the change in the magnetic field gave rise to new professions that enhanced people. People could awaken random initial talents and choose different professions within the system, and once chosen, the skills could transfer to the real world. The awakened talent determined the professional's destiny. From then on, the sages entered a new way of life and combat. In Yang City, the first professional training academy appeared, preparing new generations for the life ahead. The director clasped his hands and told the students they had passed all the theoretical courses of the first professional academy, and today was the crucial day for awakening their talents. The man told the youths to enter and added he was sure they were ready to become professionals. After years of training, they have the power to protect humanity, even if it means sacrificing themselves. The elder said the students named by numbers would undergo a talent awakening. Lin Knight, a student of the first professional academy, thought that after so many years in this world, the long-awaited day of talent awakening had finally arrived. The rarity of talents also varies and is divided into several types. The most common, of course, are common and rare, with rare talents falling more often to a few chosen ones. There's also legendary talent, which not all youths achieve, nor always. This also applies to the divine subspecies. It must be earned through long and hard work. As for the fantastic, it doesn't exist. Since humanity's awakening, the most coveted professions have been swordsmen and mages, followed by assassins, summoners, and warriors. But priests are the most disrespected of all professions. In extremely difficult copies, whenever there's an experienced player, mages and summoners can replace the priest's role. Priests forced to hide behind the team barely gain experience and heal. They've become a total joke. Lin Knight tugged on a girl's sleeve and asked if she had decided on a profession. The young man smiled and said it made no sense to think about it now, and he'd only realized which profession suited him after testing his talent. The girl sighed heavily and said she was just asking. Her name was Sumumu. She was also a student of the first professional academy. The boys, a little behind, observed everything and said Goddess Mumu looked more beautiful than ever today. Hearing this, our hero placed his hand on the girl's head, and she closed her eyes tightly. Alan squinted one eye and looked at the youths arguing about beauty. They got really mad, frowned, and shouted at Knight to let her go immediately. The boy and girl walked forward, and the boys behind them said Lin was a total delinquent. One of the men commented the young man always did things on his own and added he was very curious about what talent he'd have after hearing all this. He crossed his arms over his chest and shouted at the boys to slow down. Suddenly, someone reported that the 1000/1 Wang Shuai had awakened a very rare talent, a high-level talent that increased strength skills by 50%. Someone in the crowd shouted that this rare talent was perfect for the power warrior profession, and added that the handsome guy would undoubtedly be the best in this challenge. Our hero listened intently to these words, thought for a long time, and then said he really wanted to know why that guy was so favored by the gods. Lin placed his hand on Mumu's shoulder and told her not to mind the boys. The girl blushed and wondered why the young man never paid attention to others' opinions. He took a few steps forward, stopped, and turned toward Knight. Zod remained silent, frowned, and said it was the only way to become the strongest. The young man remembered his father and mother running with him in their arms toward the open shelter. The father calmed the baby and told him not to be afraid because they were almost there, and the monster was breathing right above them. After a few seconds, the man fell to the ground and the boys started calling out to him loudly. The monster was already approaching his father, but he ordered the little boy to run faster inside. The mother, who had also been grabbed by the monster's jaws, screamed for the boy to survive. After a while, the boy heard someone saying there were survivors and they had to be brought in quickly. The boy called for his parents, but a woman approached him and said he was now part of their family and invited him to go home with them. The guy told Mumu it was the only way to protect himself. Suddenly, his number and name appeared on the scoreboard. He informed the girl that he had to leave since it was his turn, and she was stunned. Our hero stepped into the huge arena lit up with golden light from all sides. He seemed to float in the air, and after a few seconds asked if this was the place where talents awakened. Moments later, he saw a white and red dragon fluttering nearby. Lin shouted, feeling as if his whole body was electrocuted, then read that he had gained the fantastic talent of heaven and earth conversion. Immediately, they suggested he hide it since it had never manifested before. The guy accepted the heaven and earth conversion level 1. It nullifies and enhances all the bearer's abilities with the power to activate and deactivate them freely. If upgraded to a higher level, it can change the nature of the abilities. The current enhancement effect reduces mana consumption by 10%. The current transformation effect turns buffs into debuffs and debuffs into buffs. The upgrade requirement is to raise the personal level to 10 to undo all effects on oneself and freely change this fantastic talent. The boy realized this meant Granny would never be able to master it. He thought that if they used non-skill attacks like basic strikes or if he was healed by a priest, it could break the invulnerability and damage him directly. That's why the guy said it was necessary to hide his talent and clenched his fist. He left the arena and said he was number 1128 and that his awakened talent was hidden. The young man told Mumu not to look at him like that because his talent was still a secret. The people in the plaza started saying Lin had an embarrassing talent, and that's why he hid it. Someone added that a humble person deserved a humble talent. Some said the guy was a loser, but others pointed out that one had to proceed to choose a profession. Mumu was told she could proceed to choose a talent. Students who have already completed Talent Awakening choose a profession through the goddess statue. Our hero stepped forward and it was announced that the next could proceed to selection. A system message appeared before him saying he had the right to choose any profession he wanted. Knight thought that if invincibility was considered to some degree, then heaven and earth inversion was definitely a divine skill. He looked ahead and thought that to maximize his talent's power, he had to compensate for its weaknesses and pick the right profession. A message appeared before Lin to confirm his profession once more. He was also asked if he was really choosing to be a priest. He was the first student in the session to decide to become a priest. The young man smiled and said yes, he really wanted to be a priest. Everything around lit up with yellow light, and it was announced that the profession change was confirmed. Moments later, the young man read that the profession change was complete and was very happy. A message appeared before our hero. He was able to read more about his status and characteristics. The young man scrutinized everything carefully since it was all new to him. He closed his eyes and thought about trying to activate the heaven and earth reversion skill. The system window with the description of the healing art appeared again before the young man. Knight smiled, thinking that the skill was interpreted as reducing health instead of dealing damage, but it wouldn't bypass protective armor, so it counted as true damage. The guy thought it was great that he also had clairvoyance because an imperceptible mana leak could interfere with mages, exposing weaknesses. The young man reflected that he still had to be careful with healing skills or ally buffs, since with the heaven and earth circulation talent they could end up hurting more than helping. People near the stairs talked about how some chose the priest profession, and said it was probably cowards wanting to hide behind their team's backs. They said Mumu had awakened a legendary talent, the Bionic Tears, which allowed her to summon spirits from another world to fight for her. Everyone started talking about the girl's legendary talent. They were also curious about the profession she had chosen. The girl approached the goddess statue, and a system message appeared telling her to choose the profession she wanted. Suno thought about it for a long time, got very serious, and immediately answered that she was choosing the mage profession. Link closed his eyes and thought that a mage with a legendary talent was something amazing. After all, there was the potential to become a full member of a professional alliance. The academy director commented that he was interested in something else since it had been a long time since any student had chosen the priest profession. The young people stared at him, and our hero, who had become a priest, remained silent. Someone near the director mentioned that Knight had chosen the priest profession. Not exactly reluctantly, but the man just stroked his beard. Mumu flew at the speed of light toward our hero and shouted his name loudly. Then, more calmly, she announced she had decided to become a mage and offered to go to the competition together. The young man thanked her for the invitation and said he had other plans. The girl opened her eyes wide, looked closely at the guy, and asked what he was planning. Suddenly, a system message announced that the Les Wolves beginner contest was open, and students who had completed Talent Awakening and Career Change could participate. The boy approached Knight and asked if he could talk to Mumu on his behalf. He wanted to offer her to join his team and also told her he could take the young man with him if she followed orders. Someone in the crowd said that if it weren't for the goddess, they wouldn't have toyed with him, but Lin immediately refused and was called ungrateful. The academy director squinted and said teamwork was necessary in the competition. He added that even with enough talent, resisting hordes of demons was difficult. The students turned their heads and stared at the older man. Someone in the crowd greeted him, and the director said that in the face of demons, any disagreements must be set aside. Lin calmly replied he had no disagreements and added that he simply believed going solo gave more experience and rewards. The man got very angry. He had no idea how a priest could act alone. He pointed out that in an emergency they could switch teams, but health safety wasn't something to play with, and everything that happened in the competition affected reality. Knight thanked the director and said he would keep going solo. He thought to himself that to level up, the young man walked away and thought his power wouldn't be strong enough until he revealed his divine talent to others. The old man wondered why Lin was so confident. A system message appeared before the young man, who began studying it with interest. It stated that the Les Wolves beginner trial was dangerous and recommended to be done in a team. When asked if he wanted to go alone, our hero answered yes. From the next message, he learned that the Wolf Forest trial wasn't easy and newcomers should do it as a team. The message warned that there were bloodthirsty wolves in the forest. It said he must not let them surround him or he wouldn't make it out. The boy thought about the fact that the Wolf Forest is a tough level for new students. In the competition, in the cooperative, he could avoid losses and get a B grade. That was already the best result. He remembered there was a healing spring in the center of the circle where all pros could restore their health. It kept newcomers safe and lowered the priest's status even more. The reckless don't kill wolves. They guide them on the path, Knight thought as he saw his opponents approaching. The young man squinted and thought about how some players ventured into forbidden zones in the forest. In that case, they'd definitely die, but with his divine talent, how could he settle for an ordinary rank? Our hero gathered his thoughts and realized he absolutely had to reach the legendary forbidden lands deep in the wolf forest. Its inhabitants slowly started approaching him since they were their masters. The young man looked at his opponents and read their stats while a system message appeared right in front of him. Seconds later, the first wolf lunged at him. It was the bravest, and the guy used his healing skill. The raptor took 50 points of reverse damage and was no longer a threat. A new wolf leapt toward Lin Yu, but the new wolf was lightning fast with its attack, also gaining health points. The guy activated reverse mode, the reverse clairvoyance technique, the imprisonment technique. A message appeared telling him he had spent 30 mana points. It said his skill clears the opponent's mana, making the target unable to move. He looked at the wolf and thought the imprisonment technique was pretty effective. The young man stood still and watched another predator approach him. So our hero immediately applied the healing technique because the wolf was just inches away. A system message popped up telling Knight that 50 points of reverse damage had been dealt to the enemy. The young man looked at the wolves lying quietly to the side and thought each mob gave 10 experience points. If he destroyed all the mobs in this circle, he'd reach at least level 4. His target was the final hidden boss, and even being one level behind wasn't a problem. At that moment, behind Lin, a wolf was already ready to pounce on him. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw the monster and immediately inflicted reverse damage without hurting it. He wiped his face and thought about how he had prepared thoroughly for this day. The young man was well aware the enemy wouldn't care what level you were before killing you. A system message appeared telling him reverse mode had been deactivated. He decided to use the clairvoyance technique. In the next message, the player learned he had leveled up to 2 and all his stats had increased. Lin got 2 free attributes and put all points into intelligence. The guy thought about his ability to heal without taking damage and constantly restore mana. The academy director talked about how it's forbidden to explore certain areas during schooling and was surprised the player wanted to fight the boss. He thought our hero wasn't seeking death deliberately, and concluded his hidden talent was legendary level or even higher. The gray-haired man said if the player wasn't going to unleash his talent, they'd have to find other worthy candidates. He really hoped Knight would come back alive. The guard near the director said he bet on this guy to break the record and asked if the old man had said the girl was a worthy candidate. It was his muumuu, who, unlike our hero, was on a team and was also attacked by a wolf. The girl immediately spotted the opponent and began using a skill like Frost Flash. Her teammates shouted that the goddess was really strong. She attacked the monster. Ice blocks flew at it, and it roared furiously. Belle saw more predators approaching and thought it wasn't good. She shouted that there were more mobs and she needed to escape, but immediately thought that doing so would shatter the goddess's image. Instantly, the girl made a lightning-fast decision and shouted to the guys to get behind her. She didn't hesitate and immediately used a skill like Bionic Tears. Then after a few seconds, decided to use a special skill called Frost Flash. After that, the monsters no longer posed any threat to the players. The wolves scattered to the sides. Muumuu frowned, pressed his lips, and said cheerfully that they were safe now. The director, who was also watching, commented that it wasn't bad, and his colleagues said that lacking combat experience and relying on talent wouldn't get you far. Our hero was promoted to level 3, points collected. He thought about the speed, just as expected, and killing steel mobs would promote him to level 4. Suddenly, the young man heard some crunching sounds, stopped, and turned his head. Lin went to the bush. It was the bush making the sounds, and he thought it was here. He saw several wolves on the hill. The leader was a dark descendant of the Wolf King. The guy found out through a system message that this wolf was the ruler of the wolf forest and was naturally very fierce. It attacks any creature it sees. Since it's a hidden boss, it's mentioned in textbooks as a forbidden mafia. A large number of students have been injured trying to fight it. Future heroes have been bitten. That's why the Academy included these lands on the forbidden list. Knight thought the wild wolves always surrounded the king. He understood. The wolves, like any normal animal, occasionally left to find a comfortable place and wouldn't return to the den once all problems were solved. The young man knew they often left, so it was easy to take them out one by one. A system message appeared in front of the guy saying he had done reverse damage to the wild wolf. He thought that the mobs troublesome for him were the best blood bags because once he gained the experience, he would immediately go solo against the dark descendant of the Wolf King. As the king had fewer and fewer subordinates left, his level rose, and a system message appeared before Lin saying he had reached level 4. Suddenly, the dark descendant of the Wolf King started screaming like an eel. He was very angry. The young man smiled and wondered if he had finally seen what was missing. He looked at his opponent and told him the final match was about to begin. He had previously familiarized himself with the Wolf King's traits. The guy was very aware that the stats were far superior to those of normal wolves, but our hero wasn't going to fall behind. His opponent started growling at him, but that didn't stop Lin. He thought the Wolf King's attacks were just restoring resources, and if he attacked more, he could straighten him out by standing still. The Wolf King's eyes glowed, he bared his teeth, and breathed heavily from the effort. A TMO message appeared before the young man saying the recharge had completed, and he was very surprised it was already done. The enemy's eyes lit up and he roared loudly. Then a message appeared saying the Wolf King was performing a basic attack, a claw strike, but that didn't bother him at all. He was focused and ready to fight the wolf. He came within a few meters of him, our hero, and asked if the predator understood after all, then reported that it was bad because it was too late. The monster was furious. The young man fought the Wolf King and thought that if a pack of wolves surrounded him right now, he'd have to try harder. The young man stared straight ahead, glad the enemy was alone. After a while, a message appeared before him saying killing the Dark Wolf King grants 1,000 experience points and levels you up to 5th. The young man read that he had completed the Wolf Forest Circle and was rewarded with a bronze chest. Then came the message that no skill had been damaged. His rating had risen to level 555. Our hero said that if it weren't for the fact that reverse healing isn't a damage-dealing skill, he could have already gotten an SSS rank. All the students found out that someone had completed the Wolf Forest Challenge, unlocked all hidden achievements, and scored high, which shocked them. They started speculating on who it could be. Some said it was a historic event. The headmaster said that student was incomparable and unique, then mentioned that, as far as he remembered, only Lin Knight had dared to enter those lands. His assistant asked how that was possible, since the main condition to get an SSS rank is to clear the level without taking damage, and how could anyone do that? Mumu wondered how that guy managed to reach such a high level, and the other players started whispering among themselves. Some were worried about the young man, but he was walking through a forest that posed no danger and said he had been lucky. Then he decided to open the chest he received as a reward. He did, and a message appeared in front of him saying he had obtained a silver-level skill book and silver equipment. But that wasn't all the reward, because he also got a shadow dagger. The message explained it increases attack power and improves accuracy. The guy also started learning the active skill Divine Healing, which blesses all allies within about a dozen meters with sacred power. The young man thought about how the skill had a pretty long cooldown and high mana cost. Well, at least in the early stages, that wasn't a problem. He realized that a burst of AoEs with such high damage was the strongest ultimate strike in the initial phase. Our hero had a lot on his mind. He wasn't just thinking about the rewards, but also about his uncles. Not wanting to depend on them, Lin received a system message showing he had 5 extra points left. He knew very well those points were useful and that their source was very rare. He stared straight ahead, thinking that just reaching SSS rank gave him extra stat points. Our hero decided to channel his intelligence. He resolved that from today on, he would become the best mage and the most ruthless disaster priest. The students started shouting that players were coming out, and it looked like an SSS team. The silhouette of a single person began to appear at the door. Those present recognized Lin Knight and were very surprised. They started talking about things others hadn't finished yet. Someone in the crowd said they wanted to see the hidden rewards. Sumo started running toward our hero as fast as he could and asked him to lie down. If it was him, the guys couldn't believe this loser had pulled it off brilliantly. Someone noticed the guy came back empty-handed. The youngsters stood behind him and laughed cheerfully. They couldn't believe he had made it. Knight raised his hand holding the dagger high and asked if anyone here had changed their profession to assassin. He added that he was offering top-quality weapons. One of the gathered players asked how he got it, since it was a silver-grade weapon. Lin simply asked if they wanted the dagger. The guys started saying they wanted it. Our hero thought the 50,001 player offered for the dagger was a fair price for a first-class weapon and said he was willing to sell it for 50,000. Everyone present looked closely at the young man when a girl shouted she was willing to buy the weapon for 100,000. The players present were very surprised. Their mouths dropped open as they realized the family's yearly income was 10,000 coins, and saving 100,000 coins would take forever. It was simply an outrageous amount. The young man pursed his lips, thinking that 100,000 might be a bit much for such a top-tier dagger, but it wasn't too expensive. He dropped the weapon from his palm and said it was sold. The guys approached Lin and asked what level he was currently at. He calmly answered that he was at level 5. They weren't satisfied and asked which team he was on, and if it was true that he had earned an SSS rating. The director and his assistant watched everything closely. A gray-haired old man commented that this student wasn't on any team. One of the men interrupted, saying no one had managed that and that he must have found a team after entering the dungeon. Someone from the audience wondered if it was possible for a student to get an SSS rating alone in a beginner dungeon. The main requirement was to clear it solo without taking damage, and now not even all beginner pros can do that. One of the guy's friends started asking if they should bother Lin Knight more. Zod clenched his fist and said the guy got lucky and was cheating anyway, and that he was most likely a low-level priest. He added they'd teach him a lesson next time. The academy director announced to the students they had passed all the tests and from now on were no longer regular students but apprentices with extraordinary abilities. Lin stood beside his. They heard that in 30 days they'd face the most important stage of their lives, the professional exam. The old man said that in the future they return either as ordinary people or as heroes fighting demons. The gray-haired old man said everything depended on how well they performed after 30 days. And within a month, they had to visit the beginner dungeons and reach at least level 10. Our hero thought the professional exam should be done as a team since team coordination is a key evaluation criterion. The young man looked at Muma and thought about how he had already identified his partner. He knew he shouldn't focus on her perpetually cold image. In fact, she needed care more than anyone. Naive, clumsy but confident and extremely loyal. Suno always hides her true nature, but even though she's awakened powerful talents, Knight concluded he must protect her. He remembered his uncles again and, of course, recalled his plans and wouldn't let that tragedy happen again. So he suggested the girl skip dinner tonight and go to a more dangerous dungeon. The young people went to a dungeon called the Stone Cave, which housed a large number of venomous scorpions. A message appeared for the young people where they could select a difficulty level. Our hero didn't hesitate and immediately chose a hard level and pressed the button. The higher the level, the stronger the monster's stats. More participants and more valuable rewards. And the Stone Cave only has medium and hard levels. The Stone Cave dungeon doesn't have a beginner level, only medium and hard. Mumu asked the young man why he chose a hard level. He realized that even though it was a beginner dungeon, it still wouldn't be easy. But Lin just told the girl to trust him. She replied she never said she didn't trust him. She just thought it would be hard to get out of the dungeon without taking damage and might end up frustrating him. The young man raised a finger and said this dungeon had a way to clear it. The girl was very surprised, and she asked if he meant avoiding monsters while sweeping the dungeon. Lin realized the monsters in this dungeon had changed and added that he found data left by the top players, integrated and reconstructed it, and according to his calculations, it was possible to clear. She widened her eyes and thought that was amazing. It was like reconstructing the scene purely through deduction. She thought she always knew Knight hid his true power. He had started studying dungeon types and monsters very early, calculating different data, but barely passed all his theoretical exams and was always considered a complete fool by everyone. Our hero looked at the girl, asked what she was thinking, and signaled for her to follow him. She opened her eyes wide, her cheeks still flushed, and said she was coming. Mumu Senda believed the boy would become a hero and save the world. In seconds, the young pair found themselves inside the Stone Cave dungeon and began looking around. He smiled and commented on how beautiful it was, but the boy realized this was a wild dungeon, far more dangerous than the others. A system message appeared before Lin, informing them they would be tested alongside other teams due to having too few players. He told the girl this dungeon could force them to team up with others, and Knight added that they've faced not only monsters but also rivals, so they had to be careful. Suddenly, the youths froze, terrified, as a loud explosion erupted just meters away. The rival team's guy was thrown several meters backward. The players watched everything in fear. He frowned, closed his eyes, and began wiping the blood droplets from his face. He looked at the monsters and wondered how he hadn't realized the smaller mobs could take them down. The danger level is way more intense. The guy had a bead of sweat on his face, turned his head, and saw our hero. Without thinking twice, the boy shouted at Lin for help and wondered if he'd forgotten the Academy's mutual aid agreement. The young man stopped, frowned, and told his opponent he was here to help himself. The boy didn't hesitate and yelled at Knight that he was a pathetic priest, but the youth grabbed Mumu's hand and said they had to get out of there. He glanced back and told the girl that scorpions feared water and had a small attack range. He added she should follow him and do exactly as he said. Then she definitely wouldn't get poisoned. She replied she understood. The young man was silent for a moment, then added that scorpions were also very sensitive to sound and immediately started using the circling technique against the enemies. He didn't think long. Mumu approached, asking if that was his talent and said it was ranked SSS, but the boy quickly told her to be quiet. The main condition to pass was to take a unique route and avoid drawing monsters' attention. They had to find a creature in this dungeon. Lin said there was a water mass on the map where creatures that feared water gathered, and there was spring water there. It was completely harmless to humans and drinkable. The guy didn't hesitate and immediately shouted that he had to jump, which he did quickly, leaving the girl stunned. Mumu paused, looked at the water, and after a few seconds jumped to follow. The girl was fine and emerged with a young man holding a stone in his hands, deep in thought. The boys who had fought earlier were being attacked by scorpions just minutes ago. Those guys couldn't understand what was happening and stood there confused, watching the events unfold. The monsters began approaching the water mass as a whole army, then stopped at the water's edge. There on the island were Lin, Knight, and Momu, feeling safe. The poisonous Scorpion King was huge and deadly venomous, especially its stinger. Our hero frowned and started signaling the monster to come closer, remembering it feared water. But the monster stayed near the pond, only making terrifying sounds without approaching the water. Lin smiled, stared at the scorpion, and said if it didn't step forward, he would. Seconds later, he began killing the venomous scorpions one by one. He kept going until he earned 2,000 experience points. Lin's rival couldn't believe the priest had such a powerful damage spell. After all, he and his team could barely take down a single scorpion. The boys looked ahead, unable to believe what they saw. He said he'd handle the rest of the monsters and use the biomimetic tear skill and ice spell. She was amazed she could level up so fast. Now he was level 4. Mumu had learned this from the system message. Knight turned his head to the girl and said they now had to fight the poisonous Scorpion King. He told his companion that his opponent had managed to confront his innate fear of water. Mumu used his ice spell skill and read in the system message that it dealt 10 spell damage, which surprised him a lot. She was surprised the monster had such defense, feared making a mistake, but the guy calmed her down and realized the core was in the second segment of the abdomen. But the young man didn't finish before the Scorpion King started attacking them. He shouted for her to keep creating fulcrums, The assault technique dealt 150 damage to the poisonous Scorpion King, and our hero noticed the monster was very tough. Despite taking damage, the monster approached the youths, and the boy said it was time. He immediately used the ice spell skill again. Our hero dodged the attacks and thought his opponent only raised its body in a certain move, revealing a weak spot on its belly. He regrouped and landed a critical hit on the weak spot. Thanks to this, 1,000 damage was inflicted on the poisonous Scorpion King. Mumu opened his mouth in surprise and shouted it was incredible. Immediately, a system message appeared saying the dungeon run was complete and rewards were being distributed. The young man's level rose to 6, and they also received a golden treasure chest and 5 free stat points. A boy and a girl were reading a system message when players from the other team ran toward them. The guys dropped to their knees and begged to be taken under their protection, pleading not to get angry and saying they were willing to serve. But the young man didn't even turn to them and told them to shut up and not tell anyone about today's events. The guy looked at the players with hatred and added that they better not gossip or they'd face very serious consequences. The youths were in the teleport space and decided to open the chest. They knew very well that no one but them could use it. Yilling ordered to open the treasure chest. The girl opened her mouth in surprise since they had gained 5 attribute points and couldn't believe it. Also, a 2-handed house sword, an ice shoe, a poison bubble, and an emerald ring dropped. Mumu was very surprised, and Knight said it was incredibly lucky. What attracted him most was the ring, which although silver grade, reduced skill cooldown time. The young man knew very well that in an auction it was worth almost as much as the free points they got and that they could get about 1,000,000 coins for it. The boy told his companion that the poison bubble book was for mages and let the girl take it. The girl replied that the book was gold class based on poison, but she had previously used ice-based skills and added that once mages choose an attribute, they can only learn skills related to that attribute. Suddenly, she fell silent. A system message appeared before the girl saying the hidden skill Master of the 5 Elements had been activated. 2 of the 5 elements had been unlocked, and her companion was very surprised. Lin, meanwhile, commented that Mumu should delve deeper into all this and could unlock other new advantages. He added he was thinking about what advantage mages had that set this class apart from all the others and had a few tricks up his sleeve. The girl laughed and said they should get moving since time was up. She asked Lin how he was going to use those 5 attribute points and said she'd like to see it. But the boy told her she wouldn't like his methods. The players talked among themselves. Some said scorpions scared them. Others pointed out that Mumu is a beauty, a cutie. The guys apparently had a weakness for her. There was also a group of guys curious about who was next to the girl and realized she seemed weak but had recently reached SSS level. There was also talk about the shadow dagger. Suddenly, a yellow sports car sped up close. Everyone got really scared. The guy who got out of the car said Lao Chao was right because the girl he was talking about is truly incredible. She grabbed Knight's arm and told him to get out of there, and he asked her what was going on. Mumu said she didn't like people like that guy who rely on their rich family, steal from innocent people, and have a habit of messing with girls from poor families. But the dark-haired girl turned to her and asked if she could literally wait a second. It was Wan Xiaofen, the heir to the company. Wan gave his name and asked if the beauty wouldn't mind meeting him. The students started whispering behind the guy's back. Everyone was curious about his life. Wherever he went, he immediately became the center of attention, and the girl closed her eyes and said she had a boyfriend. Our hero was very surprised by this answer. Wan looked at Lin and thought she was wearing cheap market clothes, and the girl was like a flower among cow dung. The young man said he then thought his companion knew Xiaofeng. Wan, for his part, raised his hand and shouted at the young man to get lost quickly, and Knight punched him in the arm. The rich man yelled, "How dare the guy hit him," and asked if the person he messed with and used the warrior skill knew his status. Then he used the reverse looting technique. But our hero looked at his opponent with pride. A few seconds later, the attacker was pushed aside by some unknown force. He fell to his knees, grabbed his stomach with one hand, and started screaming and moaning in pain. After a few seconds, Wan looked up, sweat dripping down his face, and asked his opponent through clenched teeth what his class was. Lin, on the other hand, stared at the guy and responded that he hadn't done anything, and everyone around could vouch for that. Then our hero smiled widely and announced he was just a blinder and nothing more. Those present started talking about what had happened and why Wan was lying on the ground. And Mumu realized it was the talent of a knight. Chao Feng began to stand up, clenched his teeth, made a fist, and started cursing. Drops of sweat appeared on his face. He frowned and wanted to hit the young man. 1 second later, he was on the ground again, telling Lin to stop playing dirty while thinking about how the reverse technique worked in a very interesting way, not only dealing damage but also extra damage. He looked at Wan and concluded the attack had been a bit weak, even though he hadn't used half his power. Xiao Feng shouted, "If the guy is so brave, then fight normally and I'll make him kneel and apologize." But some man in the crowd started yelling that awakened powers can't be used in normal fights. The young man with glasses thought about the fact that Wan and both were tough and had top-tier gear as their opponent. He knew the knight had gone through the dungeon alone and his level had risen to level 5. He immediately apologized to the young man for his friend's rude behavior while wondering why he hadn't heard anything about Lin before. Nike replied he didn't want to cause trouble. but Xiao Feng disagreed. In fact, he shouted at Yao Qihan to teach our hero a lesson, but the man with glasses was smarter and wasn't going to attack Nike. This made Wan very angry. He looked awful, his face twisted with rage, and it didn't show he was the heir of a wealthy family. Xiao started pulling his friend away and told Lin that if Wan didn't calm down today, it was unlikely he ever would, so she should be careful. He also asked her not to come to school this month and offered her a bank card as compensation. He offered to help with any problem, really hoping for understanding, but Nike rejected everything. The young man said he wouldn't bother anyone if no one bothered him and wondered what Wan would try to do to him. He was going with Mumu and thought about how he had an amazing skill to see what he could do. Lin posted online a strategy for completing levels in a stone cave. She asked if he could sell it for the price he wanted since she was really worried. The guy was sure no one would turn down free attribute points, and at that moment, players from one of the teams were in the cave. Their situation wasn't easy. They wanted to buy a strategy and test everything out. Some people had doubts and were afraid to spend money on something, but they took the risk, and after literally 3 minutes, the dungeon was cleared and reached SSS level. It was pretty surprising for the player. One who bought the strategy was happy to have beaten the level, finding it unbelievable that the strategy was so simple yet so undiscovered. The second guy also pointed out that the stone cave terrain is too complicated and the conditions are weird, but with the strategy, everything is easy and clear. Plus, the young players said the strategy's fees were more than reasonable. The players have been actively searching online for a strategy to keep earning free attribute points. Mumu was really happy that more and more people were placing orders. In front of the woman was a webpage where Nike was selling his strategy. She asked if her assistants had found the person selling everything. They replied that the seller had used hacking techniques, then added that the IP address was from a professional academy. The girl turned her head and realized there was something interesting going on at the academy this year. Lin Yu wrote in a private message that they wanted to buy a greatsword and agreed to meet at the school dungeon entrance. Mumu was glad the guy managed to earn over 300,000. The young man said everything was going according to plan and added that they were getting active promotion. He thought about it and noted they'd still have to go through more dungeons and the graduation weapon would need to be replaced eventually. Then he added that with high-end gear but no combat knowledge, they're just cannon fodder. He said the time before the challenge is very valuable and that he always wanted to get stronger. Then he wondered why he spent time strategizing and working to make money. The young man smiled and said he needed that money to protect the people he cared about because, after all, they protected him. Guy said in his past life he had no family and never felt warmth or support, and being brought to this world was his greatest luck. He added that now he has parents who love him dearly, but 10 years ago, his relatives treated him like a leper. Those natives hoped the boy would die in magical waves, just like his parents wanted to split the inheritance among themselves. In front of the boy, the so-called relatives talked about how to divide the inheritance and lamented that the boy should have been put in an orphanage. The adults foaming at the mouth started calculating who gave what and bought the baby, all said to grab a bigger share of the inheritance. That's when Nike ran away, thinking about getting food and surviving, but then his uncle and aunt took him in and treated him like their own son. These kind people treated the boy well, he gradually relaxed, and later they helped him reclaim his parents' inheritance and cared for him wholeheartedly. The young man looked at the kids running out of school and realized he couldn't continue his studies without his uncles. He added that now he was earning money to pay back the good relative's debt. The guy was very aware that getting stronger also meant using all his power to protect the important people in his life and not repeat past mistakes. The young man heard someone greeting him and turned his head with confusion in his eyes. The girl asked if he was selling the hunting sword. A student from the first professional academy introduced herself to the guy, and the other guy asked, surprised, if she was a student or maybe an athlete. He added that he doesn't do face-to-face talks, but the other replied yes, saying his phone was broken. So, a few minutes later, our hero asked to confirm the purchase and realized the hunting sword's attribute wasn't refundable. The young man frowned, got tired looking, and started handing over the inventory to the girl. She stared at him intently and caught the house sword with impressive skill. Bei then asked if it really only cost 80,000 and added that it cost 200 at the house. The boy asked if the school teachers had told her about market prices. The girl replied that she has always struggled with math, so she had no idea how much things cost. Lin thought she was a spoiled rich girl and advised her to check prices next time to avoid being scammed. She thanked him and paid for the weapon. From the system message, the young man knew he had received 80,000. His balance had surpassed 1 million, and he had been upgraded to gold card user status. The guy was glad he didn't have to pay for shipping and said if the girl needed anything, he was always at her service. A system message appeared before him, informing him that he had been granted an unknown power. He had received a special buff called Goddess's Lucky Gaze. Our hero was very surprised and asked the girl if it was her talent. Ta confirmed it and added that she could still improve it, then asked if she could join his team. Knight looked at her, thinking a talent like G's was very rare. The guy realized that the girl's talent wasn't just limited by the quality of reward boxes because even those with weak talents could open legendary and divine boxes. With such a buff, the young man opened his mouth in surprise and wondered if Bei had told anyone else about his ability. Ta said she hadn't told anyone. Lin asked if the ability had any limitations. Bei informed him that she could only use it 3 times a week and with one person at a time. Knight asked her not to tell anyone about the ability and added that her buff is incredible and her potential terrifying. But once people find out, they'll come to her. The young man pointed out they could also take away the girl's freedom to monopolize her abilities. He asked where the professional alliance would eventually lead. And this organization leads humanity in the fight against the magic wave. But after all, within the alliance, there are many factions with complex relationships. Open and covert fights, assassinations, and betrayals happen all the time. That's why Lin offered Ji to join his team and said they would take care of her. She was very surprised and asked if he was serious. The young man smiled, introduced himself again, extended his hand, told the girl he was glad to have her on his team, and offered to meet his comrades. Bei got excited and said no one believed she could fight on the front lines. And the guy thought about how she handled a greatsword. After a while, the young people approached her, and she immediately asked if he was the athlete and clarified he was now her comrade. The girl stammered and introduced herself. Mumu extended his hand and said his name, and she realized he was very handsome and had very soft hands. Our hero wondered why she looked at him like that, hugged Bei, and asked how Knight treated her. The guy coughed and suggested they go eat and then talk about the dungeon. Mumu turned his head and clarified what they were going to discuss. Ji opened his mouth and eyes wide in surprise, and somewhere out there, everything was still very calm. In the Goblin Dungeon until our hero visited, Lin had determined that the nightmare level suited him. But so everyone could earn free characterization points, the boy decided to go alone and then guide the girls. Nightmare level is the hardest difficulty of field dungeons during the beginner period, but the rewards here are also the most generous, and the treasure chest will be gold rank. But likewise, monster traits are enhanced, and if the professional isn't careful, they could lose their life. So a difficulty like money is more important than life. It's highly not recommended. She shouted it was impossible. He asked Knight if she was going to commit suicide and said it wasn't reckless to challenge nightmare level right now. He replied that it was fine. He wondered if she doubted his abilities. Mumu said she trusted the guy but that the nightmare level goblin dungeon was too dangerous. Gino managed to watch the young ones fight. He said he had some matters to attend to. He informed her that she would go first. He said goodbye and ran off. Lin told her he knew she was worried and asked her not to worry, saying he would challenge the dungeon's normal level and offered to go home for lunch. The girl asked the young man to promise he would do it. Otherwise, she would tell everything to their parents. The boy thought he should obey the girl for now and would go through the dungeon alone at night. Mumu wondered if Lin was really strong enough to pull this off. The media also published photos of our hero and information that he is the strongest rookie ever. The article's author noted that he took the photo at the dungeon's teleport point and that the guy goes into dungeons alone. The comments blew up into a scandal. The comments were all over the place. Some wondered who this guy was, but others didn't believe the author. Overall, people were very active in the post's comment section. Sue had the phone in her hands. Knight asked the girl what she was looking at and called her over for dinner. The young man snatched the phone from her hands and shouted loudly. The woman praised the kids' hard work lately and invited them to eat. Sue and Lin thanked her. The uncle asked Knight how she was feeling, even though it was hard for her to come. The young man stood in front of the monsters and said he had to get stronger for his own good. He added that the nightmare level dungeon would welcome him. From Wan's house, voices could be heard speaking loudly. Sean Gihan talked about trying to save his brother and even refunded part of the money. Without him, he would have ended up in the hospital. But the man shouted that it was all a lie and said he didn't need help. That Xiao was nothing but a piece of trash who should have been equipped. But his brother interrupted and told him Xiao needed to rest. Xiao Feng couldn't hear those words. He grabbed the glass on the nightstand, threw it at Jihan, and shouted that he had been dishonored because of him. A coward. Wan shouted at the young man to get lost. The man looked angrily at his brother and asked if he thought he could do whatever he wanted just because he was the youngest son. Wan told him he shouldn't agree to his uncle's request to take care of him. Then he added that Xiao Feng should get such a beating that even his own mother wouldn't recognize him. He laughed and pointed out that he didn't even have a mother. The angry guy shouted that the conversation was over and that Xiao should leave and never come back. He started hitting the young man. The man with glasses thought Wan had no idea who he was dealing with. A newcomer who appeared out of nowhere and could seriously hurt him without even using an active skill. And although he never admitted it himself, he goes through the dungeons alone. Jihan thought about it. Xiaofan didn't try to calm down, pulled out his phone, and asked the man to help him deal with someone. He invited the brothers with gear and weapons. The boy frowned and muttered that they would handle everything, but that this idiot needed to be taught a lesson, that he needed to understand who makes the decisions in the academy. Our hero was already near the Goblin Dungeon's first stage. The mystical forest was waiting for him. There was a system message in front of him listing the dungeon's difficulty and description. But most importantly, no rewards would be given unless the final level was completed. Monsters were roaming somewhere, and Lin thought about how this dungeon was one of the toughest due to its long clearing time and unclear requirements. Players don't come here to farm gear or points. What attracted the young man was the fact that here he could open gold-level chests, and with the luck buff blessing, even platinum-level chests. Goblins appeared in front of the guy along with a system message describing these monsters. Our hero smiled and thought about the timer that had started. He was completely calm. He knew that in 5 minutes the monsters would gather at the entrance. This time, his main goal was to test his optimized method of monster gathering and quick killing. Knight realized he not only had to kill all the goblins and their king, but also that the clearing time for each level couldn't exceed 10 minutes. The young man knew the boss had to be killed on the 5th dungeon level, and he had to withstand the monsters' attacks. Monsters would appear in 30 seconds, and when they did, our hero began destroying them quickly. 2 minutes and 5 seconds had passed since the first level started, and the guy had encountered the goblin leaders. The guy was smiling, running from the monsters, and yelling that everything was roughly as he had expected. Our hero turned around and saw a large number of monsters. They were all armed. The young man used his power, and because of this, Divine Healing was upgraded to level 2. He destroyed all the goblins on the first dungeon floor. A system message appeared in front of Lin indicating his strength, agility, spirit, and intelligence had increased. He looked at it and thought about the fact that he had managed to clear the first level in just 5 minutes. His method of pulling monsters for the first level wasn't a problem. The boy was glad that even though the damage wasn't enough, there were still 5 minutes left to spread it out. Literally, after a while, all the monsters on the second level were destroyed. Thus, our hero quickly and successfully cleared all the levels and reached the 5th. He used a skill like teleportation and within seconds found himself in the Goblin Palace. The Monster King started screaming furiously when he saw the man. He asked how he dared to invade his territory. A system message describing the monster's skill, strength, and level appeared in front of the boy. He felt strange knowing the secret realm boss was right here. The surprising thing was that there were no mobs nearby. The monster started yelling at the young man to die. Lin had learned from the system message that the Goblin Dungeon Lord possessed immense strength and had no idea why he was using this attack. Seconds later, the monster jumped very high. This was how it wanted to attack the young man. Thoth immediately thought to dodge to the side to avoid the impact point and lie down to reduce damage from the second wave of aerial strikes. But the young man made a different decision. He nullified the damage from the earthquake impact and the air shockwave from afar. The beast gritted its teeth from the earthquake. It wasn't prepared for this event. Its eyes burned with hatred. At the same time, our hero's health points increased significantly, which was quite pleasing. The goblin's health points gradually decreased. It screamed loudly and panted desperately. The guy read in the system message that the Goblin King was using the Dragon Spear skill, canceling the effect of the ability and allowing him to recover 200 health points. Lin smiled and learned from the next message that the monster was using the Flying Summon skill, canceling the effect of the ability, letting the group recover 40 health points and avoid being knocked back. The monster got very angry and then asked the young man if his skills were useless against him. The young man looked surprised at the monster, wanted to say something. The Goblin King got furious and shouted that he had found our hero's weakness and started calling his people to come kill the enemy. Knight thought that was to be expected from a nightmare-level stealth boss. Without a doubt, he was tough to handle. The boy gripped the weapon in his hand tighter and thought now wasn't the time to use his most powerful spell. The young man covered his mouth with his hand and frowned. His pupils shrank to tiny dots. He looked ahead in surprise. The Goblin King shouted to his subordinates to attack the man, but not to use any skills, adding, "Kill him faster." A large number of monsters began to approach Lin, and their chief said that if skills didn't work on him, he would be able to withstand hundreds of normal attacks. The monsters started moving toward the young man, who used a skill to dodge. The monsters realized the man was trying to escape and began shooting their bows. Some arrows still hit our hero, and his health points dropped. Lin turned his head to the side, saw the arrows stuck in him, and wondered what to do with them. The young man activated his special skills and restored health points. Then he ran his hand over the wounds caused by the arrow's impact, and they healed. The Goblin King's eyes flashed with hatred as he shouted that the young man was impossible to kill, calling him a cursed human. But our hero calmly stared at his enemy. You could see on his face that he hated the monster. The monsters didn't like Lin's gaze, but he started attacking them. His health was dropping. The Goblin King yelled that the young man had no fighting spirit. Then he shouted at the young man to stop running and face him in a fair fight. The knight wondered if that was what he called fighting spirit and thought to himself that it was time to face him. The monster shouted that there might be demonic power before them, for how else could it come from such an insignificant race like his? Our hero was completely calm and said this should be the end this time. The castle where the monsters stood was struck by lightning and caught fire. The monsters had no chance, and seconds later a message appeared saying the Goblin Legion had been destroyed and the player gained 1,000 experience points. From the next message, Knight learned that the Goblin King's health scale was below 1% and he was in a near-death state. The monster whispered that he was finished. The young man didn't look at his opponent for long but immediately used a healing spell, an assault technique. The monster's whole body was still electrified. It screamed and writhed in pain. Literally seconds later, system messages announced that the Goblin King had been defeated. The guy had earned 5,000 experience points and leveled up to 7 and would receive a platinum chest. The young man looked ahead and thought that there was no doubt the Goddess of Luck's gaze skill was so powerful it could directly enhance his chest. He thought this would be enough for a long time. He had 20 hours left for another run and began opening the treasure chest. A message appeared before Lin informing him he had received a skill book, free attribute points, and equipment. The Sacred Light skill book had a specific effect. You had to spend mana to attack enemies with Sacred Light. The young man also received a Flame Vial, a gold-level item that deals 300 damage when used in battle, and the Shining Stone increased attribute value by 20 points. A Divine skill book, Starburst, also flew out of the chest. It restored health and could illuminate all team members. The Sandstorm Bow helped summon a sandstorm when fired, dealing extra earth magic damage. Knight smiled, thinking about how he got equipment and 2 platinum-level skill books. He was insanely happy. The young man felt encouraged seeing that no matter how tough the monster was, it could be killed quickly. The system message appeared again before the boy, and he confirmed he wanted to learn the skills. Lin gained 15 intelligence attribute points and studied Divine Burst and Sacred Light skills. All attributes increased by 20 points. From the system message, our hero checked his improved stats and thought this dungeon run was definitely not in vain. The young man was glad that his strength, agility, physical combat, and intelligence had all increased by 20 points. Suddenly, he heard a noise, turned his head, and thought someone had found him. Knight asked Mumu if she was also going to be in this dungeon, and she angrily told him to stop with the nonsense. The girl asked if the young man had cleared the nightmare-level goblin dungeon. He said that was true. She said she knew that and added that she wanted to go to that dungeon herself. The guy was about to say something else when a car stopped not far from them. A male voice announced that they had finally been found and, after all, how many teleport points had they traveled? The stranger looked at the young men through a spyglass and noticed Lin's expression, which clearly said he wanted to get beaten up. Wang Xiaofeng was in the car with a boy. He said Knight would be in trouble and then started hitting his companion on the head with all his strength, asking who he was telling all this to. The companion commented that our hero was a very intimidating man and that he couldn't do it. Wan shouted at him to shut up and pointed out that he knew it wouldn't do any good. Just seconds later, his expression changed. A smile appeared on his face, and the boy declared he was ready. Our hero sat in front of the computer monitor and stared at it intently. He posted a strategy online that made it easy to clear the nightmare dungeon. The young man was very serious. He pressed his lips and carefully read the messages. Then he found an article with his photos and information saying he sold strategies and had cleared the SSS level himself. Users left a flood of comments under the photos, most not believing what they were seeing. Messages from the system began appearing one after another, showing he had received coins even to buy the strategy, and after a few more minutes, he got used to the fact that he had received 500 coins and now had a balance of 1.5 million coins. Lin stared at the monitor, thinking that was way more than he expected. When the system message appeared again, he learned that the koi effect would last for another 15 hours. The young man thought he still had time to rest and recover, so he decided to go for a run. Our hero was walking calmly near the coast, and there were also people strolling when a sports car stopped a few meters from him. The guy stopped to see what it was about. In the car, he saw Wan Xiaofeng. He offered to take Lin to the place he needed, and Lin asked if the boy hadn't told Xiao Qisang it was better not to mess with him. The guy told Knight not to mention his brother's name because he was a traitor. The stranger in the car laughed and told our hero to listen to Xiaofeng or he'd get punched in the face. Then the boy added that otherwise, they might pay a visit to his family. The young man thought they had already found his home address. He started walking toward the car and noticed Wan was acting like a man. He wasn't crying or asking for help. If he failed, he'd get very angry. He yelled at his companion, forbidding him from helping, and said he would challenge Lin to a fight himself. And he added that he had an excellent team, the kind the young man could only dream of. Our hero frowned, watching the boys closely, and thought about going for a run. However, Wan whispered to his companion that they would carry on with the plan. His companion agreed. Lin had already gotten into the car and told the boys to move quickly, adding he didn't care how many there were, and he added that he had things to do and didn't want to waste time with them. Xiaofeng got very angry when he heard that and shouted that the young man would regret it. He sat calmly in the car, and Wan threatened to make the knight crawl on the ground like a dog. Knight stared at his opponent. He squinted his eyes and thought about making his life worse than death. And the car sped forward toward the unknown for our hero. After a while, it stopped near the forest. There were a lot of guys there who immediately started calling out to Mr. Wan. Lin got out of the car and silently noticed there were many of them here. Then he asked if it would be one-on-one or a group fight. Xiaofeng replied quietly that there would be a duel. Then he turned his head toward our hero and answered with a sarcastic smile that Knight would fight his gang. The boy's wind shadow blade appeared in his hand. The young man laughed and calmly told his opponent that he didn't care. Wan frowned but kept smiling, realizing Lin was about to die. He immediately pointed at the guy and shouted for the others to attack him. They didn't hesitate and charged into battle. Weapons appeared in our hero's hands as he calmly faced his enemies. Although there were many attackers, the young man was hit by a large number but easily dodged. The blonde man sitting with Wan in the car used an assault weapon against Knight. The guy bounced to the side, thinking about how powerful his opponents were. Then he thought about having to use the inversion talent. The opponent laughed mockingly and told Lin he was just a kid after all. But in just a second, his expression changed drastically. His whole body trembled with fear and terror. Not only him, but the other attackers also got very sick, trembling, covered in sweat, and vomiting blood. The blonde wiped sweat from his face, wondering what kind of trick Knight had used. He was well aware they hadn't been attacked and wondered what this ability was. Instantly, it broke through gold-level defense. The guys started asking each other if they were okay. Someone said Lin was just a simple blinder, but they were far more numerous and had gold-level gear. Together, they thought they could win. They surrounded our hero, each starting to use their special powers. Suddenly, their mouths and eyes opened wide in terror at the divine glow of the stars. The young man attacked his opponents like this. He was using the Fallen Hell skill. The blonde trembled in fear and said it was impossible for that to happen. He added that they lost in an instant. Knight turned his head, hearing a voice saying it's better to trust money than people. Wang smiled and said he had bought a diamond-level suit worth tens of millions at the Quick Wealth auction. The system message said the diamond-level suit had no level requirement and all stats plus 100. A guy commented that Quick Wealth is the best auction and that the ticket alone is worth several million. He added that the guy must be the sole heir to Wan's company. Xiao Feng smiled and told Knight that this time he would make him kneel. Then he asked our hero if he was scared, but Lin didn't answer. Wan, meanwhile, remained sarcastic and told him he still had time to start begging for mercy. The guy replied that no matter how powerful his team was, it wouldn't hide the weakness of his spirit. The young man's opponent got very angry. He ran toward him shouting for him to die and used the Shadow Pull skill, but Knight wasn't affected at all and bounced away. Xiao Feng couldn't believe it. He didn't understand Lin's technique but was able to dodge it. He even surprised himself, thinking the priest wasn't entirely human and reeked of demonic energy. Wan shouted that didn't exist and asked if the guy was putting everything into agility. He added that his stats were clearly better. He used the Wind Shadow Strike skill and shouted that he was about to finish him off. Our hero, smiling, told his opponent his stats were too bad since he even missed. His opponent clenched his teeth, frowned, and sweat appeared on his face. He didn't know what to say. Knight looked at him coldly and told him it was his turn now. He used the looting technique. Xiao Feng wasn't ready for that move. The guy was really confused, and that played right into Lin's hands. After a while, a system message popped up saying Wan had taken 1,000 damage and the top part of his armor was damaged. The full set bonus had disappeared. The guy couldn't believe it. He was covered in sweat and started feeling his armor with his hands. Literally a second later, he pulled himself together, gripped his weapon tighter, and wondered if the guy really thought he could dominate him with it. He started running toward our hero at a frantic pace, using skills like cutting strike and triple decapitation along the way, but he wasn't about to stop there. Finally, he used the Horde Annihilation skill. Knight dodged all the attacks easily and confidently. He was completely unharmed. He used his skill and flew several meters away from his opponent, furious. Wan was sweating heavily, frowning, and trembling. He said it all over his dead body. Suddenly, he fell to the ground and started swaying from side to side while shouting about his new trick. The young man realized even his basic attack could pierce through scum like Xiao Feng's defense and gained a health boost. Knight sat down and said Wan could surrender and offer compensation like donating materials or apologizing, but Wan interrupted, frowned, and started yelling that Lin was dreaming. He began insulting him. Our hero ignored it and attacked the enemy, noticing another one of his skills landed. On top of that, his beautiful armor finally broke. His opponent didn't let that stop him either. He started yelling like a madman, asking how Knight even dared to threaten him. Immediately after, he used a skill like Meteor Shower. The young man stayed seated as if nothing had happened. Xiao Feng started laughing loudly, insulting his opponent, then asked if he was even alive. A few seconds later, his expression changed drastically. The enemy began yelling like a drunk. Knight smiled and told Wan not to worry since his health had recovered and he could keep going. The guy standing off to the side watching everything screamed in terror. Xiao Feng was still floating in the air, coughing. His entire body was covered in wounds and abrasions. Wan's friends said it was nothing but torture. They talked among themselves about not provoking Lin anymore, but he wasn't stopping and used a skill called Meteor Shower. One of the friends started pulling his hair out and shouted if Xiao Feng was even alive after such intense attacks. At the same time, there was a video camera in the bushes recording everything happening. It turned out viewers could watch everything unfold. They actively discussed what was happening on air. Wan's friend looked very scared. His pupils shrank to dots as he shouted what kind of skill that was. Viewers watching the live stream marveled at Knight's strength. They also wondered where Xiao Feng got his courage. They noted the rich guy was pretty unpleasant, and some questioned the value of his armor. The number of viewers grew, and Wan didn't calm down. He decided to use force to intimidate the others. They watched the fight closely and commented. Most supported Lin. Some even wanted to become his disciples. Someone in the chat noticed the brunette looked a lot like their classmate, and that she had a conflict with Xiao Feng. Viewers were very active in the chat room sharing info about our hero. They talked about how the young man had previously sold triple S-level gear on the forum. The girl with the nickname I'm Not a Seal wrote it wasn't Lin Knight, since she's very modest. It was her who didn't know what to do. She was fully aware the guy couldn't hide anymore. He was also worried that many people would want to be on the same team as him. In Lin's fan group, members wrote supportive comments. As for Wan, he didn't get any support. The public wanted this newcomer caught and punished. It reached a point where people demanded the bandit's father resign. The company was on the brink of bankruptcy. Mumu talked to her parents about Wan Xiaofeng going too far and asked them to teach him a lesson, but they refused. My mother said the bandit would get what he deserved and that if you use power that isn't yours, you'll never become a great professional. She was very surprised by her mother's words. The girl opened her mouth and eyes wide in surprise, then added that if no action was taken, it would damage Knight's reputation. The parents responded that the boy could handle it on his own. The man sat in a deep chair and asked if Lin had passed the professional test. Then he added it was incredible. He pressed the remote to pause the recording and said the young man's talent must be above legendary level. He commented it was amazing that he became a priest and added that a genius like him should definitely be in the professional league. The blonde looked around and asked what everyone thought about it, whether they should bring the guy in ahead of time. One of the women said she agreed with that proposal. The other said the young man should be recruited as soon as possible. The bald man smiled and asked Lao Wan why he was still here if he wasn't supposed to rush to see his son. The redhead laughed and said it wasn't a problem for the minister. Wan Tansio, head of the Han Company's Influencers Alliance branch, had been thinking about something for a long time. He was sweating and said he was still the company boss for now. He added that compensation had already been planned for Mr. Lin Knight. He also apologized for his son. But while the youths kept struggling, a voice suddenly told them to stop. Someone flew in by helicopter and used the loudspeaker to tell Lin Knight to step away from his opponent. A man with glasses approached, shouting that the company boss Wan wanted to talk to him. Chopin said cheerfully that his father had found out everything and now that the young man was finished, not much was left. Knight, however, asked what this was about, if the president was trying to intimidate him, and added that he should go himself. The man with glasses bowed, handed our hero a phone with the company boss Wan on the line, and said they were willing to compensate for damages and apologize personally. Chopin yelled frantically how dare a guy bow to this bastard and asked if he was crazy. He shouted and asked them to repeat the sentence and wondered if his father wanted to kneel before Knight. He said it made no sense. After a while, a man approached Lin Knight. It was Xiaofeng's father. He said his son's behavior was the result of poor upbringing and regretted that his kid caused so much trouble. Even Knight was surprised by those words. The man said words weren't enough and that he could request any team in uniform. His son, meanwhile, threw himself to the ground and started rolling on it. The boy foamed at the mouth. He seemed like a spoiled brat. Our hero accepted the offer if the man was that sincere and realized he had his own proposal. He smiled and said he wanted 3 sets of diamond-level gear, 1 set for a priest, a mage, and a swordsman. The guy thought for a bit and added he wanted 5 million coins and asked if that was okay. Xiaofeng's brother, who was dragging him away, opened his mouth wide in surprise. Zhang Jihan was sweating and thought that 3 sets of diamond armor for different classes would be a bit hard to find. Wan Tansio said that if someone wanted 3 sets, they'd have to wait a few days since none were ready, and added that the alliance was ready to provide resources and help. Jihan put Xiaofeng in the helicopter and cursed silently. He grabbed his glasses with one hand and looked around. They weren't easy. Because of that, the man quickly found an electronic device, a video camera. Seconds later, he was already beside him and reached out to turn it off, but he looked straight into the camera. He thanked everyone for watching and mentioned that Mr. Wan had personally come to apologize and discuss compensation. He added that the details would be announced tomorrow during the official broadcast. Our hero thought the Alliance had had their eyes on him ever since they learned of his talent. Tansio told him he was ready to provide all the resources from the secret dungeons and added that there were more than 50. The man realized Yan Cheng wasn't as simple as he seemed. It had many divisions and ravines. The young man looked closely at his opponent and replied that it wasn't a bother and that a month would be enough for him. Xiaofeng's brother was very surprised. He couldn't believe a guy could clear 50 secret dungeons in a month. His mouth dropped open in shock. Even the guard behind him was stunned to hear those words. Tansio told our hero to come back tomorrow night with his companions and he would treat them. Lin said he would announce on the forum that Mr. Wan had invited him to dinner. The man frowned, wondering if Knight had already thought this through. Sam smiled and said they were on the same page. He thought to himself that this guy's potential was truly limitless. Our hero said he would let Xiaofeng go this time but wouldn't tolerate anything like this again. Yang Cheng replied that the Han family wasn't so simple and that cruel conditions breed cruel people. The boy said he didn't want to talk about Wan's family or get into those details since their relationship wasn't that close. The man thanked him for his understanding. It was the best restaurant in Yangcheng with an official 5-star rating. It was always popular, and the chefs there were masters of their craft. The main feature of this place was the great attention paid to customer service quality. They even assigned a room for a single guest. The pavilion housed a service team that was always on duty, and that's where our hero came in. By the way, all diners at this restaurant, regardless of status or bill amount, received VIP service. Mumu told Linju to be careful, even though Mr. Wan had personally apologized live on the broadcast. The boy told her not to worry and added that there wouldn't be any problems. He thought to himself that Wan Tianqi had fallen at his feet just because he saw his potential and wanted to establish a connection early. The restaurant employee opened the door for the young people and invited them into room number 888. Mr. Wan was already seated at the table. He smiled, asked Knight if he had arrived, and immediately invited him to sit. Then he asked if the girls were his friends. He invited them to sit at the table and asked the waiter to serve the specialties. Then he raised his glass and asked to be allowed to apologize first for his force's misconduct. He added that it was his fault for raising him to be a reckless troublemaker. Mumu's eyes went wide thinking about how there was no arrogance or showiness in the man, while Bei thought the gentleman radiated wisdom, courtesy, and kindness. The girls also raised their glasses, reflecting on how Mr. Wan, a prominent figure in their city, really acted like that. Lin thought the man was sacrificing his heir and thanked him for his honesty. He added that if his son realized his mistakes and learned to control himself, this situation would be forgotten, and he shook his hand. The guard told Mr. Wan that all preparations were finished and allowed them to bring out what was ready. The huge security guard replied that everything would be done, and seconds later a system message appeared before him, detailing a piece of equipment called the Demon King's armor. The young man thought that it was a kind of diamond armor, but not much different from his own. And after all, from the outside it might seem like a crude way to gain an advantage, but he realized it was better with it than without. Our hero returned the smile to Mr. Wan and told him he was happy and satisfied with everything. Beichi was very happy. She opened her eyes wide in surprise and stammered her thanks. She figured that having 3 diamond-level sets at once was very expensive and, despite the Wan family's wealth, it couldn't be done just to preserve reputation, but the girl said the gear was amazing and thanked the knight. The whole meeting was streamed live, and viewers were amazed that the company executive showed so much respect for this newcomer, Knight. The company had a pleasant evening at the restaurant and held a fruitful conversation. Bei enjoyed eating the delicious dishes like never before. Lin suggested to the knight that he proceed with the main question. He agreed and noticed many reporters gathered outside. He said he would accompany them outside. The man also provided a pass to the nightmare-level dungeon, Bone Realm, and said the promised resources would be added later. The young man took the pass in his hand, gripped it tighter, and replied that everything was fine. As people began leaving the restaurant, a large number of reporters shouted that Lin was outside and started taking photos. The guy stepped forward, and the reporters began questioning him one by one. Wan Xiaofeng was already in his room, fully bandaged and sweat pouring down his face. After a few seconds, he opened his eyes, saw the silhouette before him, and wondered who the creature could be. He laughed heartily and said it was him, Manga, his supremacy from the abyss, a supreme demon of pure blood and great power. The boy glanced aside and muttered that he guessed who was in front of him. He asked if demons come to everyone in the form of bedbugs. Mega thought about the city's laugh in front of him that was struck by the priest. He was curious how he could be so proud and himself told Wan about what's called a strategic retreat. He asked if he understood clearly. His eyes burned with red fire. He smiled bitterly and asked if Wan Xiaofeng wanted this. He added that ignorant fools laughed at him instead of helping, and his friends and family had chosen to side with the enemies mocking him. Then he offered to make a deal with him and said he would give him a terrifying power, thanks to which the boy could take revenge on all who humiliated him. But Wan shouted at Mega to leave as soon as possible. The supreme demon said that this time he would show mercy. Xiaofeng stood on the bed and declared he didn't want the favor of a low-level bug. He shouted to give the terrifying power to the poor and losers. Mega paused for a moment and mulled over whether to kill that idiot on the spot. Then he said that if Juan fixed everything and decided on his own, he had to say his name. He smiled and declared he would answer the call and give the boy the great power of the abyss, and then he'd become fearless. It was a secret dungeon. The Bone Land, level 6 to 10. Its difficulty was nightmare. Our hero asked Bei how many more chances he had this week to show off his talent before the youngsters arrived. System messages said that the Bone Land is an abandoned place, wrapped in death and surrounded by an army of sleeping skeletons. Those who enter here awaken the monsters with their blood. Gil raised his index finger and answered 1, as he had already been to the dungeon twice and used it once. The guy asked him not to rush to use it, but save it for later. Lin realized that although the dungeon was nightmare level, they had a diamond armor set, but ordinary platinum drops wouldn't help them much. The young man commented that Mr. Wan had promised better resources this week and added that they had a disaster-level difficulty available. Knight reported that the only thing they're missing right now is weapons, so if anything happens, they'll sell everything unnecessary. The guy started telling the girls they had 3 goals for this dungeon. First, to earn free characterization points. Second, to get weapons. And third, to come up with a strategy to dominate the dungeon. He whispered an eye, smiled, and said they'd wait for the young man's instructions. A message appeared in front of the players saying that the difficulty level of this dungeon for pros and players is called Bone Soup. In the next message, they learned that to pass the SSS level, 4 conditions must be met. First, you have to kill the final boss, Ghost Rider. Second, destroy all the skeletons. The third condition is that you can't use weapons that suppress all the bad effects. Also, players must not keep more than 60% health. That was the 4th condition. Bei said it was now clear why this place was called Bone Soup, since the normal and nightmare levels were identical. He added that it shouldn't be so scary with the sacred sword. He smiled, realizing that with 300% deterrent damage, this level could still be called nightmare. Mumu hugged Ji and told him not to worry because after they get out, they'd buy snacks with the money from the sale. The blonde agreed. Lin laughed and said she understood. She added that she worked here for free. The guy looked around and said now they were starting to pay attention. He brought a finger to his mouth and bit it so hard it bled. He asked what he needed. The young man lowered his hand, and drops of blood dripped from the small wound directly to the ground. He thought about using the blood to attract all those skeletons and make them suffer their worst fear, the sacred sword. Lin gritted her teeth and applied a skill like reverse healing, as well as a constant bleeding status. But that wasn't all. Our hero, to solidify the effect, applied the decay status skill, and suddenly a whole horde of blood-smelling skeletons started appearing out of nowhere. The guy shouted they had to leave. Mumu put an arm around Bei's shoulders and shouted at the young man to keep going. Earlier, Knight reported that the anesthetic pill is taken for body injuries. It greatly reduces pain but has no healing or wound-treating abilities. Our hero didn't hesitate long and accepted it immediately because his wounds made his whole body ache. Lin ran forward quickly. His health level was dropping fast. He thought about how the skeleton's thirst for blood surpassed their fear of the sacred light. Bei's cheeks flushed pink, sweat appeared on his face, and he wondered if they should go help. Mumu, meanwhile, assured the girl they must fully trust Knight and emphasized he wouldn't let them down. The young man cut his hand again. He did this to make fresh, new blood appear. The guy's health level was critically low and already below 10%. A system message appeared in front of the young man indicating that the Boneland dungeon's limit was ahead. Our hero ran toward it with his last strength and thought about finally reaching it. Immediately, Lin's health points increased, and his system message notified that divine healing had occurred. The skeletons stopped and looked confused. They started to suspect something. The monsters turned around, and Knight calmly told them it was too late to run. He activated the divine skill star reversal. The young man stood up, narrowed his eyes, and calmly observed everything happening. He used the fallen heaven and hell skill and reduced all the skeletons' health to 0. The guy approached the huge peak and looked down calmly. The danger had passed, and at the other end, the girls were watching our hero closely. They looked scared. It was easy to tell by their wide eyes and open mouths. Knight pressed his lips tightly and looked at the girls. But he, unlike them, seemed completely calm. After a while, he joined Bei and his... Then he heard a voice coming from the cave. It was the skeleton boss asking who had woken him. He appeared riding a skeletal horse and shouted he would make bowls from their skulls and drink their blood. A system message showing the Phantom Rider's stats appeared before the youths. The monster got even angrier than expected, and our hero saw a system message with the word Ogunchar. Lin's eyes burned with the fire of hatred. He clenched his teeth and said it was all an investment. He didn't hesitate and immediately used the encirclement technique so the monster wouldn't stand a chance. The boss screamed after such intense attacks and his health gradually decreased. The monster was shocked to suddenly lose 500 health points, and our hero got really excited. He smiled and noticed a loud crack coming from the monster. He saw a message saying the boss had a life force inversion, a cataclysm, and his level had increased by another 50%. The next message reported the Skeleton King's HP was critically low. Another message appeared telling Lin that the passive skill Undead Rage had activated, strengthening the boss's attributes. The monster's skull glowed turquoise as it let out a terrifying roar, summoning its brethren. A message appeared before night indicating all undead were being resurrected, increasing the boss's XP by 100 per second. The young man watched as a large number of monsters around him were brought back to life. The boss started yelling loudly that the idiots would be finished soon and asked if there were any last words. But the young man wasn't scared at all and burst out laughing. Bei realized Lin was so strong and said the monsters were too dumb to understand basic math. The boss increases XP by 100 units per second, and Knight doesn't need the forbidden healing power of the sacred sword. Mumu confidently said 3 seconds was enough to finish off the monsters. Slowly, health was being restored, but it was used up even faster, and the undead started dying. The monster opened its mouth in shock, unable to understand what was happening. The guy told him to think twice about those last words and looked at him with hatred. A message appeared before our hero saying the dungeon's Ghost Rider boss had been killed, granting 6,000 experience and treasure chests. The young man had already reached level 8 and couldn't be happier. He had done what he planned and learned from the system message that he earned extra points and activated the march. The girls started yelling at Lin Yu about how cool he was. A message appeared before them saying they weren't getting rewards since they hadn't contributed. After a few minutes, Mumu's eyes and mouth opened wide. She was very surprised. A system message appeared saying the final mission in the Boneland secret dungeon was complete, and the reward was the stone sword key that opens a portal to a unique secret dungeon. Bei shouted and then asked if she read that right, that it was a cataclysm-level dungeon key. A system message appeared before Knight asking if he wanted to open the treasure chests. He asked in surprise if there was a unique secret key hidden in the Bone Soup dungeon that hadn't been opened yet. Lin began examining it and realized it was different from the usual keys given as rewards. Then he noticed that once used, the key, along with the rewards inside, would disappear. Ji's eyes widened and asked if it was true that at this level, unique dungeon rewards were much better than the normal ones. Mumu replied they were several times stronger. Plus, unique rewards definitely appeared in them. And wow, I was surprised none of the pros who passed through SSS before managed to stay 100% healthy. He replied, "Who cares?" and asked to open the chest faster. Bei echoed her. The girls were curious about what Lin could do without the luck skill. The young man squinted. A drop of sweat appeared on his face. From experience, he himself was curious. A message appeared saying the gold-level treasure chest had been opened and the gold-level skills, Great Assassination and Black Iron Fist, were obtained. The next message revealed the platinum chest was also opened, granting free character points and platinum-level gear, Su, Bloodhound, and Meteor Staff. Our hero said there was nothing for a priest, but that the Meteor Staff would suit Mumu well and asked if she needed a new weapon. The girls laughed. She said it wasn't a big deal. After all, 10 character points were still good. A message appeared in front of the boy saying he had gained extra intelligence points. He also turned to Mumu and said this staff should match her earthly attribute as Master of the 5 Elements. She asked where they were going now. Lin said their team was already top in team and results and that he'd run through once more to gain experience and reach level 10. He asked the girls if they could clear the dungeon solo and commented they wouldn't get SSS rank, but S would be easy to achieve. But the main goal was to gain experience. Bei clenched her fists, opened her eyes wide, and stammered the best answer she could. Suddenly, our hero pushed Mumu aside and shouted at the top of his lungs for her to get up. Knight and Su were shocked, their eyes and mouths opened wide, unprepared for what was happening. The bald man put a knife to Ji's throat and shouted at Linju if he was the one who took the stone sword key. Bandon grabbed Bei and shouted that if the young man had any brains, he'd hand over the key nicely. Our hero and Mumu stared intently at the enemy. The girl was very scared, sweat drops appearing on her face. The bald man, satisfied with himself, held the knife to Ji's throat and said she'd die otherwise. But the girl wasn't scared at all by those words. On the contrary, she got very angry and started attacking the villain while shouting why Lin should give her the key. The hooded man beside the attackers frowned, gritted his teeth, and stared straight ahead. He didn't hesitate long and started attacking Bei. The girl saw him. Sweat drops appeared on her face. She was scared. She held her huge sword in her hands, ready to face her opponent, but her skills and level weren't as high, and she fell at the bald man's feet, the hooded bandit noticing she couldn't be trusted at all. Our hero stared straight ahead and told the bandits to release the girl if they valued their lives. His opponent just laughed and scolded him not to be so rude, but his cheerful tone changed very quickly. He couldn't understand what was happening to him. The young man used his strength and started attacking him. The man screamed in terror and Bei managed to dodge to the side. The bald man shouted at the hooded one not to get involved, that he could handle everything alone. Another bandit lying on the ground called Night Lice Ridden and shouted how he could do that when he wasn't even level 10. At the same time, an unknown force grabbed the girl who was with the villains. Lin laughed and told the bandit he'd soon regret his arrogance. He added he'd send him straight to hell. The hooded villain frowned, smiled evasively, and wished no one from Knight's group would survive. He added he'd kill the boy first, saying there was no point in facing the girls. The bald man laughed like a madman and realized the guy didn't care at all about his companions' lives. She was covered in sweat drops, her eyes and mouth wide with fear, not knowing what to do. But Knight calmly told Mumu and Bei to fall back. He added that the opponent's auras had turned demonic, and then claimed they had already made their deal with the devil. He thought about how they had given up their original gifts for the Abyss's power, which was many times stronger, and decided to use divine healing, a disaster reprieve. The young man attacked the villains, who were many since they weren't backing down. The man laughed and called Lin scum who didn't even know how to use his abilities. He informed his brother that their opponents were probably well-equipped and cheerfully added they'd take all the loot for themselves. But Knight approached the bald villain with burning eyes and attacked with all his might. His hooded companion frowned, sweat dripping down his face, and shouted loudly. He approached another boy and yelled for him to heal faster, but the boy replied he couldn't because he was dead. The man frowned, unable to understand how a priest, not even at level 10, could have such powerful attack power. He even considered that the boy probably had made a deal with the Abyss Devil, then realized Lin wasn't exactly an ordinary priest. The bandit thought the bastard didn't even look human and shouted at him to run. Our hero opened his mouth in shock and shouted if the opponents had thought about running. He pointed out he wouldn't let the devil's henchmen get away like that and immediately used the divine skill, Starburst Explosion. Falling into hell, the villains fled, screaming in terror and fear. Lin thought that by increasing the damage of all skills, they could take down a nightmare-level boss with high defense in seconds and concluded they must all die. He said if they didn't act, they'd get hurt, and Bei asked if he wanted to destroy the bodies and cover their tracks. Then he wondered what would happen if the Alliance found them. Guy realized no alliance allowed traitors to gather among them and added they worked alone, not caring about their organization. He looked in the bald man's bag and said there was a sealed mix of platinum and gold gear, sighed heavily, noting only the fallen could use it, then closed his eyes and thought about something. Suddenly, the system sent a message announcing the giant forest was open. Our hero smiled, thinking it was a Doom-level dungeon. That made him very happy. The 10th level giant gibbering forest dungeon was once used as a trial for a profession. No team had cleared this dungeon in years. The Darkcaster boss had become a real nightmare for all students and a major obstacle for professionals. Many warriors joined forces to challenge it. Their goal wasn't to gain experience or top-tier gear, but the key to the Forgotten Lair, a drop needed for the first step to the Perdition level. The youths moved forward and saw the giant gibbering forest ahead of them. She clenched her fists, eyes wide, mouth open, gasped, and asked if they were really going there. Knight turned to her, smiled, and said they would once Beiji's skills recovered. He informed them their goal wasn't just reaching level 10, but also getting the Forgotten Lair key. Bei asked what they'd do with the dead, because even if they burned them, traces would remain. Whisper times, bury them. The girl thought about it, and added it'd be great if they had a necromancer among them. The young man listened carefully, scratched his head, and found no words to reply. He grabbed the bad guys, slung them over his shoulders, and said he'd rather throw them in the dungeon and have them disappear after closing. Mumu was happy and said it was a great idea, then added why hadn't they thought of it sooner. The youths threw the bandits into the dungeon with a sense of accomplishment. Lin looked at the message and said they'd return to the academy to recover. Once Bei's skill was ready, they'd immediately open the giant gibbering forest. The girls listened carefully to the guy, smiled, and accepted his proposal. One day later, the youth sat in a cafe. She noticed that since they'd been preparing for the exam, they hadn't eaten. Knight told him not to worry because they'd have plenty of money and eat well. He closed his eyes in pleasure and ate a variety of treats. The boy said they could come here more often in their free time, and Mumu agreed with him. Then the girls suddenly grew sad and said it was actually better to save money and buy equipment later. After all, she wasn't a kid who spent so much on food and entertainment. Bei said she also had coins and offered to pay the bill. The girl got a little scared, but the young man laughed and told them their team wouldn't lack funds. Next, a waiter came up to the table, greeted them, and told them a certain gentleman had placed an order for their table. Lin was surprised, looked at the man who made it, and wondered who he was. The man immediately approached the young people, greeted them, and said his name was Shang and Yang. He was the head of the Deep Alliance and leader of the Living Sound team. The young man stood up, greeted him, gave his name, and said he was a student at the academy. He introduced the girls as his teammates. The blonde man said he was here to invite them to join the Life Sound team, and added they'd get a pass for a professional alliance. The young people looked at Shang and Yang surprised. They hadn't expected to hear that from him. Lin immediately replied that he hadn't taken the professional exam yet, and added that in such a case, others might say he was taking someone else's spot. He began pouring a drink from the pitcher into glasses and said he couldn't decide, then commented they had no plans to join any team. The man said he didn't expect him to refuse, and added that the strong and always have their own reasons. Ian took a sip and said he hoped Knight would join the alliance soon. He smiled and said if they needed anything, they could contact him anytime. He added that for his own selfish reasons, he'd like to spar with Lin. Our hero smiled back and then agreed to the proposal, thinking the person before him was pretty interesting. The young people gathered in the garden behind the academy. The boy said it was time to start scrubbing, so he told Bei to use her special skill, and she did. A system message appeared indicating they had gained an unknown power and a special positive effect from the goddess of luck's gaze. Knight said she would use the key to open the giant Ghibli forest door. The message said the operation was under review, but seconds later the dungeon opened. The young people stood at the entrance, ready to enter, level up, and claim rewards. A system message appeared showing the dungeon's features, difficulty, level, and story. Lin said they say this forest is a fragment of a secret world, separated from the secret dungeon, and noted you can enter at level 8, but the difficulty here is nightmare level. After a while, the players spoke in unison about seeing the dungeon's inhabitants. The report said they were ghost warriors with skills like straight punch, jumping kick, throw, and cross punch. Mumu yelled at the young man to leave the two warriors to her and Bei, since they could handle them. One of the girls used the skill Bionic Tears, and the monster's health and critical damage started dropping. Gifrusho frowned and opened his mouth wide in surprise, all because his attack power had doubled. He was actively attacking the monsters and saw their health drop fast. Knight shouted to be careful of the monsters and dodge their attacks while thinking the team was proving really useful. The girl's abilities now surpassed most students. Bei was dodging a very strong opponent, gritting her teeth and fighting with all her might. Mumu didn't stay still either. She attacked another equally strong monster and immediately started using her special skill. Poisonous Bubbles. She was really tense. Gino stayed back and used a unique skill called Flame Massacre. Both skills worked quite effectively against the monsters. The monsters were blown to pieces. Suddenly, a purple mist began spreading at the edge. It started spreading from the dark side of the dungeon. Lin shouted for everyone to get ready, then announced that the boss was already in front of them. A plaque appeared describing a powerful white spirit rider monster. The beast was really strong and tall. It was several times bigger than their warriors. The knight used the skills Divine Burst, Reversal, and Hellfall. Mumu watched everything closely and asked in a stammering voice if it was over. The guy looked carefully ahead and said not yet. He asked the girls to hold their positions since they needed to increase the damage caused by the bleeding. Bei stood to the side, observing carefully everything that happened, and the monster was whole and unharmed. It approached the young uninvited guests. Yes, it immediately used skills like bionic tears and poison bubbles. Deciding it wasn't enough, it added more flame massacre. The enemy's health began to gradually decrease. A system message appeared. The enemy was poisoned and under the bleeding buff, but the monster was no pushover at all. It recovered lost resources. All of Bei's weapon attacks were nothing to the monster. Apparently, its XP had increased and its stats had improved a lot. Mumu asked if it was a passive skill of the White Spirit Rider. She noticed it became super defensive when its health dropped to a quarter. Ji had sweat drops on his face and realized it was the first boss, but already very tough. The guy used clairvoyance technique and said it was an exceptional monster skill, then said he would distract it and told the girls to be careful so the enemy wouldn't switch to them. The young man hid behind branches and shouted at the rider to start attacking him. He himself thought about the fact that the position was visible, but the view was clear and the distance was right. Knight concluded that a professional knight clearly wouldn't use ranged attacks like spear throwing. A system message appeared saying the boss had used the Lion Barrier skill, a special shield that could absorb 300 points of physical and magical damage. Just seconds later, it used the Light Launcher skill against our hero. But despite all that effort, the guy stood firm even though the attack was quite strong. The message that the monster had strength reversal appeared again. Its attack, power, speed, and defense increased greatly, and it stood confused looking at the guy since his attack would do a lot of damage. The young man used the reverse healing skill and started attacking the enemy. The attack failed and he wondered what to do next in a situation like this. He decided to use attack skills against the boss, grabbed a weapon, and switched to combat mode. Our hero didn't hesitate long, gathered strength, and used the flash skill against his opponent. The boss didn't stay still but used a clairvoyance reversal technique called grip. A message appeared saying that after using the Shining Stone, all of Lena's stats increased by 20 points. The guy has the blink skill active. With it, you can teleport 10 meters in a specific direction. Our hero smiled and thought it was a shame since he had already planned this. He began attacking the enemy and his health level started decreasing very fast. The young man thought that after the attacks, the boss's skills were all used up, and now he'd have to rely on melee and attack power. The monster, realizing the Sacred Light skill cooldown, was over by a few seconds, froze in place, then turned around and started to flee. He was out for a few seconds, froze in place, then turned around and started to flee. Mumu shouted if it was too late for Knight to escape. Knight happily yelled back that his ability had recovered. Just in time, the reversal of the life force cataclysm also occurred. After a few seconds, the message appeared that a divine stellar reversal had taken place, a fall into hell. And next, players read that the White Spirit Rider had been defeated and they had earned 8,600 experience points. Lin's level had risen to 9th and his allies to 7th. Lin said he didn't think the first boss would be so tough and added that the dungeon lived up to its name Perdition. And Mumu realized that without the guy, it would be hard to clear this dungeon even with diamond armor. The young man realized there must be a second boss and somewhere, and wondered why there was no signage when suddenly they were caught by a vine plant and were very surprised. But the young man quickly realized it was a special form of teleportation. Knight immediately shouted to the girls to land softly or they'd get hurt. Everything went well, and the young man announced that they would finally meet the legendary Curse Master. Suddenly, our hero shouted loudly to his team members to be careful. Mumu's eyes and mouth went wide as she started yelling frantically. The guy's name was really scary. As for Bei, sweat drops poured from his fear as he shouted loudly. The team members saw a message informing them they were facing a Curse Master. Judging by the stats, this monster was several times stronger than the previous boss. Lin positioned himself a few meters away and calmly told him he had wanted to meet him for a long time. Sweat appeared on the guy's face, and he thought that just as expected, the monster could attack without even appearing, and if he didn't dodge, it would be a disaster. A system message appeared revealing the monster he was entering combat mode, automatically enchanting its weapon to deal magic damage when it attacked. The Curse Master stood in front of our hero and realized all his stats had improved a lot. In the next message, players learned that a spell was used allowing them to dominate even the tank class. Lin thought his opponent was very fast and shouted to the girls to block the hits instead of dodging. Bei listened to the young man and faithfully followed all orders. The girls started losing health quickly. Jito watched and thought about the monster's immense power and also felt he might die soon. He realized that the moonlight energy wasn't the monster's strongest skill. He was embraced by Mumu, who started giving medicine. He was glad to have prepared it in advance, in sufficient quantity. The guy started attacking the opponent and thought about how Lin couldn't switch to his original priest skills to rescue them right now. He kept energetically attacking the huge formidable boss. After all, it was an important target. They applied the skills Vitality Reversal, Cataclysm, and Capture technique, and the monster's vitality started decreasing slowly. Mumu was surprised that Lin's 3 powerful blows only reduced the monster's health by 1/3. She realized that even with upgraded gear, it would be tough to handle it. so she applied her skills. The monster's health had decreased, but only slightly, not critically. This attack made it even angrier, so our hero thought it was time to act drastically. The young man approached the monster and started attacking it with great force, but the monster wasn't going to give up. It immediately used the Ascending Dragon Strike. The boss didn't let the guy recover, and attacked him again, this time with a triple punch. A few seconds later, our hero's face twisted. He took a critical hit to the neck. It was a critical hit. The monster saw his superiority and wasn't going to stop. The girls watched in shock, unable to say a word, just wide-eyed and open-mouthed. Fortunately, our hero recovered very quickly, got healthy again, and with a smile, said not to underestimate the power of the Curse Master and thought to himself he had to be more careful. The guy immediately used the grab technique, the power of the Curse Master, and he thought to himself that he had to be more careful. The guy immediately used the grip technique. The monster, on the other hand, wasn't ready for that move and turned its head, and players learned from the system message that the priest had provoked the Curse Master. The young man yelled at the girls to continue as planned. Mumu replied she understood. Knight kept capturing the enemy and thought about his next task, attacking him more while they caused damage. The young man was well aware he had to let the monster use all its skills. After all, this was exactly the kind of enemy that only fed off skill damage. A smile appeared on Lin's face as he thought about the fact that even at the perdition level, health and defense values were greatly increased, so they needed some time. The monster seemed confused. It was reported that it had diverted its attention. Its health gradually decreased, and the Curse Master himself headed toward Bae, who was hiding behind a tree. It was like a reversal of life force, a cataclysm, and the monster lost a lot of health points. Knight stepped forward and shouted to the Curse Master to remember he was his opponent. He watched closely in front of him and added that he would always protect his comrades. Then he shouted for the monster to die. He used the skill, Glory of the Stars, fall into hell. The health level became critical. The monster struggled to hold onto its weapon just a little longer before collapsing. A system message appeared, saying the monster had been killed and they had gained 9,300 experience points, and the perdition level was dropping to nightmare level. Our hero watched closely, eyes wide with surprise, reading that the final mission was completed, the boss defeated without taking a single hit, and the reward to summon the Curse Master was obtained. Bae approached the guy and said he had killed the monster so fast, and asked if he could summon the Curse Master. He added that the dungeon's difficulty had decreased. The young man smiled and said it was their overall victory, though he himself realized no one had ever defeated this boss before. He found it hard to imagine the reward they'd get since they'd done it without injuries and without a luck booster. Here, Mumu shouted for everyone to look at what the system was showing that it wasn't over yet, and asked what else could be there. A system message appeared informing them that access had been granted to the disaster-level dungeon, Forgotten Lair. The players read they had met the dungeon requirements, and soon the original Sin Warden would open the door. His startled, and Knight asked if he had forgotten their goal was to get the Forgotten Lair key. He narrowed his eyes and added that by completing hidden tasks, they could get the permit. Suddenly, he said he didn't know how it affected other professions. Mumu said they were just helping and wouldn't have to worry about the Curse Master. Lin said she just wondered if they had enough training for it. The young man said the remaining enemy was the last giant deep in the forest, and thought to himself that the forest scenery was truly amazing. The second monster was the strongest in the entire dungeon, and although big, it was the dumbest with weak techniques. It was the last giant. No one knew why it was here. There were also other features in the description. Bae shouted that the monster was so huge, then asked what they should do. Lin reported that the most important thing was not to panic. The guy said the monster had a slow attack speed and could only sway from side to side while walking. He added the enemy might try to stomp on them. Gilla wanted to attack, but Knight asked him not to. The young man realized they would use the same tactic this time and wondered what if they asked the Curse Master for help. Our hero quickly summoned the Dark Curse Master, who began approaching them. The players received a system message that a level 15 Curse Master was just as powerful as when they fought him. Lin frowned and shouted loudly for him to attack the huge beast. The two monsters clashed. The huge monster even froze, confused for a few seconds, and just seconds later was struck by the moonlight. It was very strong. He fell to the ground and his health level dropped. His opponent didn't wait for him to regain consciousness and struck a massive blow. Knight shouted for Mumu to attack directly, and Dalla helped with her skills. A system message appeared. It appeared before the players, saying the entire team's attack power had increased. He activated the Fire Sword energy skill and then his favorite bionic tears. The attacks were very strong. The monster's health level dropped quickly. Lin shouted it was time to finish it and used his skill called Fall into Hell. A system message appeared saying the boss of the last giant in the secret world had been defeated and 8,000 points were earned. Knight's level rose to 10th and his to 8th. The young man's eyes lit up with joy. He wasn't even prepared for such an event. Mumu crossed his fists and shouted happily that the guy was now level 10. A message appeared saying all hidden quests were completed and experience points would be doubled because of that. Bei said happily it was the first time he'd seen something like this. The rewards were being counted under the effect of the goddess's gaze skill. Thanks to luck, the treasure chest obtained was upgraded to diamond level, and so were the players. They immediately received a platinum level chest. A message appeared asking if they wanted to open it. The girls hugged, and Mumu shouted that Bei's skill was so useful he was insanely happy. Link calmly pointed out that was why he'd accepted Chi into his team, seeing her potential. A message appeared saying the diamond chest had been opened. A diamond level skill was obtained, and all participants received 15 free character points. A platinum treasure chest was also unlocked, and players received 15 free character points and platinum level equipment. Giant's Heart added 15 points to all stats and had the active skill Giant Strength. Core of Lime added shield penetration to the weapon. It also increased the weapon's physical attack. Lightning Scroll added additional lightning magic damage to the weapon. White Spirit Rider's Armor. The armor a knight needs increased strength and constitution. White Spirit Rider's Spear, a weapon also suitable for knights, increased strength. It had the effect of a light-throwing spear. Blue Sea Tide is an exclusive pre-skill that restores health to all allies. Our hero rubbed his beard and reported that the last skill was pretty good. He liked it. Suddenly, a strong wind of unknown origin rose, but the young man stood still and thought. Something appeared. Asterisk. A system message about the Blue Tide reversal appeared, causing a death wave to sweep across the field. The young man thought about how his reversal talent didn't improve any skills that originally benefited the team. He realized he was losing control after the reversal but gained speed after Blue Sea Tide, transformed into a skill that dealt damage. The debuff state would only increase the enemy's debuff. The young man watched closely in front of him and thought it might be a decrease in stats like health or dizziness. From the message, the boy learned the Blue Tide skill and couldn't help but get excited. He told himself to remember to pay attention to learning Dispel skills in order to develop control. Knight thought about what was said regarding how, if a talent reached an advanced level, it could change its nature. He smiled and decided he would have the final say and change it as he wished. Lin told the girls they would handle the rest of the drops as they left, adding he wanted to inform Shangji and Jianjian about the disappearance of the Dark Curse Master and the dungeon's level drop. Then our hero pointed out that it was most likely going to cause a big commotion again. And then our hero pointed out it was very likely to cause a big stir again. The next day, the academy director couldn't believe Lin Knight had killed a curse master. In the giant forest that seemed endless, he asked his opponent if he had understood the dungeon part correctly. Level of perdition. He pointed out that the guy contacted him after the sweep, and the Alliance confirmed it all. Ian realized only 73 professionals had ever stepped into this forgotten lair. 24 of them died inside, and the rest gave up halfway. No one made it past the halfway point. The man added that no one ever tried to retake it a second time. It wasn't even about wanting to, it was that they simply couldn't withstand the onslaught. Mr. Wan commented that they would wait until the guy got stuck at level 15, and that the Alliance would do everything possible to help such a talented professional, but it would all depend on him. After entering the dungeon, the director said everything was going well and added that all the students owed a debt of gratitude to Knight. The elder said they should hold a meeting and reward the guy. Then he mentioned that he had already brought up sealing the dungeon entrance, but all parties were against it. The man with glasses pointed out that they needed to eliminate students who couldn't face such challenges and added that the Alliance wouldn't raise trash unfit to be professionals. The director said he was just thinking out loud and added that they'd already expelled several students because of him. Ian fanned himself, clucked, smiled, and said it wouldn't happen again. Mumu burst into the director's office, apologized, handed him the phone, and said they had some problems. There was a post on the Pro Forum about Lena. The girl said the news they gave to the Alliance had spread throughout the forum. The girl said Knight is an outstanding student at the academy. He's a future professional chosen by the Alliance. And she added that he's the future of the academy. She was trembling all over and begged the director to do something about it. He replied that they understood her concern. Ian frowned and said he would verify all the information provided, opened the forum, and saw a comment calling the young man a villain, suggesting he probably made a pact with the devil. Someone posted about having connections. His father taught Knight and confirms he has a connection with Yobles. The men grew tense as most readers demanded tests be conducted. The director told her he would go with her to check the situation with this teacher. Mr. Wan laughed and commented it was hard to know if that teacher even existed. Ian squinted and said it was most likely an invention by the Alliance's opponents. He added that they needed to issue a joint statement. Then he added it probably wouldn't be enough. Suddenly, Knight entered the room and said he wanted to do a test to detect demonic energy. The television reported that the Alliance has strongly condemned the rumors, and that what the Academy's teacher said was a blatant lie. The men said the rumor spreader confessed, and that Lin had no connection to the devil. A large number of journalists gathered at the Alliance headquarters. Many asked questions to our hero. He stared straight ahead and heard the question if he had come forward to initiate the demonic energy test. The journalists were sweating nervously, anxious and tense. The young man started to walk away from them and calmly told them, "You can't be a journalist if you're that timid." The journalists started arguing among themselves, wondering why they suddenly got so scared. Someone noticed a colleague doubted the alliance. They were asked to calm down since they were live. Lin entered the place where they conduct the demonic energy detection. The man told him to enter the sacred judgment circle and wait. The young man obeyed and began removing his outer clothes. A system message appeared indicating the demonic energy check had started. A man, a few meters from our hero, pointed out that Knight didn't have to do that, and added that some people just don't want to admit their inferiority. And then he added that most professionals only believe in the young man's strength. The young man smiled and said he had thought about that too and was very interested. And then he added that he actually doesn't care about the accusations. And he said he just wants the people around him to stop being scared and worried about him. The man said they hoped the results would be good or they'd have to arrest him. Lin agreed. Our hero closed his eyes and waited for the test to finally finish. The men watched the process closely, sweat dripping from their faces from the strain. A message appeared saying the check was successful and Knight's demonic energy level was 0%. No devil pact was detected. The young men got excited, and the eldest said that was excellent, and he added that he would print the report right away. The people watching the live stream shouted that something like this couldn't happen, that Lin had no demonic energy. Others started posting comments about what the haters would do next. Knight said he was going to post his specs and equipment now, and if anyone doubts it, they can fight him and see for themselves. Juan was freaking out and yelling because everyone believed it, because the guy was trash and cursed by black magic. He ran somewhere mumbling that he had to warn them. Our hero walked down the street with a calm smile on his face, and someone was watching him around the corner. It was Schopenhauer, thinking about how Knight had fallen so low that he bought tea and didn't pay the bills. After a minute, he started talking about where Lin had gone and swore he was lost. The boy hit him and asked if he was a fugitive criminal. Juan shouted that he was sneaky. The young man said chasing was way sneakier. Xiao Feng turned to the young man and said it's not up to a gentleman to decide what's right or wrong. Then he stepped closer and asked if the guy had encountered any abyss demons possessed in a similar way or something. Our hero was surprised and said no. He himself remembered what happened in the dungeon and thought about sending back two fools like him. Juan started yelling at Lin not to be rude. After all, he was the one who let the young man into the dungeon and then the abyss came after him. He added that he wanted to tell the Alliance to evict the demon. The guy was shocked and asked if he meant the abyss demon had taken a liking to him, and he not only resisted temptation but did it on purpose. Chaffin hummed and said some rats who don't even dare show up in the human world could make him give up. He shouted that he was born to be the star, had money, looks, strength, and didn't need low-level help. Ling looked at him and thought about how he had been dethroned, but what bothered him most was how his opponent was portrayed. The young man thought about how Juan could resist the demon's temptation despite everything and was very impressed. He went and said he also hated abyss demons and that the talents he had weren't available to them. He said he hoped the boy understood, but shouted that he didn't believe it. Our hero thought about contacting Juan Tianqi again to put his son under house arrest again since he's very troublesome. Linju received a message that the guy spreading false rumors about him had been caught. The club supporting Knight wrote about that liar, even taking over the guy's leadership. The young man wondered who it was, and it turned out to be Chao Wan from his class. John ordered the villain to be blacklisted so he couldn't buy or sell gear, and asked for the evidence to be scanned to post on the forum. The man who wrote the message realized the guys wanted to teach him a lesson themselves. Lin, however, ordered him not to do it, and then added that if Cal was captured, he would reveal the secret strategy to bypass the secret dungeon locations. And with that, any dungeon could be cleared. A voiceover was recorded announcing that a guide for the Land of Bones dungeon would be released soon, and you could watch a preview. A huge message appeared. The players were shocked that the dungeon could be cleared with health. Knight posted that students needed to be notified that anyone who bought or distributed pirated copies would no longer be able to get their manuals. It was posted online that all pirated copies of Lin Bei's manuals would be removed. It was read that anyone who tried to redistribute them would be blacklisted and unable to receive any guidance in the future, and accomplices would also be blocked. The young man gritted his teeth reading such a message and thought there was no way to save money now. But some users agreed with Sal Yuan and considered him a hero. A dispute broke out among users, as most believed a thief had stolen Lin's hard work and taken advantage of his massive effort. Some students thought everyone just did what they could to survive. This was Joan's case. The hero's side was glad to have access to a trial version of the new manual. Some users wanted to join Knight's team to get the guides as well. First, the girls reading the chat were very surprised to learn the new guide would only be available for purchase and that copies would be deleted. A young man was climbing the stairs, and the chat talked about recruiting other users to join the group since new guides would be released. The number of subscribers increased rapidly because it wasn't just a fan group for Lin. Guy, on the other hand, wondered why the subscriber count had shot up so dramatically and concluded that sometimes a point is more effective than a punch. He was glad this could stabilize his income stream and said it was time to organize his stats. A system message appeared in front of him showing his character profile. He was very surprised to see an exclamation mark next to his awakened talent and clicked on it. A message describing the skill opened before the young man. He began reading carefully and thought he would postpone upgrading for now and deal with it after the professional trial. He considered that after passing level 10, His intelligence approached 150 and set a goal to reach the same amount without pumping bonuses: spirit, physique, and strength. So he started chatting with Yao Jian about the need for weapons, necklaces, and greaves. The man wrote that he couldn't meet all the requirements but would try anyway. 10 minutes later, the young man sent the inventory and wrote that Lin could choose whatever he wanted at his discretion, thinking the weapons could be sold and the greaves weren't suitable. So he wrote that he needed a priest weapon and added that he needed stones to forge level 10 equipment. Chao asked if he couldn't get everything right now, and there was a pause in the chat for a while. Knight thought about the fact he couldn't tell the man he was going to the Deadlands, but the man wrote he would try to arrange everything as soon as possible and provided the forging and preliminary equipment costs. Our hero paid the required cost. A system message appeared describing the bone necklace. The young man also got familiar with the features of the white bird jade pendant. Knight had obtained the star healing staff he desperately needed when running dungeons. He was very happy to have restocked his inventory, so he immediately decided to move forward. The young man was fully aware this required certain skills and strength, so he was focused. The forging was a success. His Demon Emperor outfit and the star healing staff were forged at level 10. As for the bone necklace and the white bird jade pendant he wore, he had also upgraded them to level 10. Knight looked carefully ahead and thought to himself this should suit him for now. He thought that with this level of gear, getting the SSS rank in the Deathlands should be enough because in a dungeon like that, the loot was either really good or really bad. Suddenly, the young man heard some noises and tensed up. He didn't understand what was happening. He approached the noise and saw the girl in front of him. He scratched his head and called her by name. Mumu got really scared and blushed. She wondered why he had come back home without making a sound. She was using her bath since hers didn't have hot water working. Knight blushed, scratched his head, said it was fine, and that she should turn around. She said it was okay and asked if he had a minute because she wanted to talk to him. The boy agreed but asked her to dry her hair and change clothes first so she wouldn't catch a cold, and she agreed. Mumu asked the young man to wait a few minutes, and he agreed. Lin asked her what was wrong and why she looked so serious. She said Bei had complained about not liking the two-handed swordsman class and added that it didn't suit her in many ways. She mentioned it was still difficult even with the new gear. The young man said she hadn't told him anything and added that he had seen her handle a great sword pretty easily. The young man said that if she found a hero certificate that allowed her to change class, Bei could choose something more suitable, and added he would ask Huan Tianqi later, but she needed to be sure if she wanted to switch classes. She said that was great, that she felt better, and that she would be back soon. Knight asked if there was anything else she wanted to say, and it wasn't just about Bei. Mumu stopped, looked down, and didn't know how to answer the guy's direct question. The young man said he was asking about her. The woman shouted that he was an idiot and then asked how he had found out. Then she asked him not to laugh after she told him something. He started laughing, and the girl got even more annoyed. She calmed down a bit and realized he was now level 11, and since awakening his talent, they had grown apart. She thought she knew, but she said they had been basically together since childhood and added she believed that even after awakening their talents, they would still be the most reliable and bound partners. Mumu said she felt like he no longer needed her, that he could earn hidden rewards on his own and become the center of attention. The girl said she was only following his orders by doing small tasks he could easily handle himself. Tears welled up in her eyes as she continued, saying she was happy for him, but that the gap between them was growing, and when they were in the dungeon, she only felt like a burden and couldn't be a pillar of the team. The guy put his hand on Mumu's head and told her she was overthinking things. She replied that he was an idiot and didn't understand, saying he didn't know what it was like to try to keep up with someone only to feel more and more powerless. He stayed silent for a moment and declared he no longer wanted to rely on her. Lin raised a finger and said if that was the case, she had to be more disciplined and start right now. That meant no snacking late or eating dinner late, but waking up early and practicing. Mumu shouted, wondering if agility was just about stacking points. The guy asked if she thought she had enough points. He held out his hand with something and told her to take it. She was very surprised because it was the heart of a giant. She couldn't believe the young man was giving it to her. Lin said this item was perfect to use during the transition and could double its effectiveness. He added that it made him believe in herself since her class talent had unlimited potential. Mumu agreed that snacking was off the table starting today. Knight thought the girl needed solid support to grow. He hugged her and had the guy try the potential of the bionic tears. Then he added that he knew how to give massages, cook, clean, and became like a playful cat. And he said he hoped the young man enjoyed it, then started yelling loudly. At that moment, Bei was standing near the open door, but it was unclear when he had overheard the young men's conversation. He entered the room, and Mumu immediately asked if she was here. Lin thanked her for coming and said he appreciated it. He asked the guy if he was heading to the land of the dead right now, and wondered if he wanted another day to rest. A system message appeared for Lin, informing him that he had been granted an unknown power that gave him a special buff. He told Bei that he had rested enough and that the girls should take a break. He added that they should watch the movie and use the stone key to summon a unique secret realm and open a portal. A message appeared indicating that the highest difficulty level had been selected. The young man announced that he was leaving. Mumu looked very scared because he saw this dungeon-level disaster. The system message made it clear this was an extreme difficulty level and that the gap between Knight's level and the dungeons was too big. The guy thought about the fact there were no traps or instant death, which wasn't what he expected. System messages started appearing. That his energy had awakened the monsters and they were waking up. A notification appeared that a whole legion of undead was advancing toward the young man. A massive army of undead awoke and started moving toward our hero. A report surfaced that the sacred saber, crown of the red flames, had materialized, granting the young man incredible power. Lin thought he wouldn't use it while going through the dungeon, but the messages kept coming, and a list of special conditions to enter the land of the dead appeared before him. The young man immediately used the star flip skill after getting familiar with it and began attacking the monsters. They started screaming that he wasn't human since humans can't summon hellfire. The knight shouted loudly the finishing blow of divine healing. The disaster descended, and literally in a second, an entire legion of undead was destroyed. There are 1,304 monsters. The boy smiled because it was just as he thought. With the improved equipment and stats, the celestial robes gave a 90% boost to healing. The group of undead was wiped out in a second without needing the Blue Tide ultimate, but a message warned that a new wave of the undead army had appeared. He took the medicine in hand and thought about how he should thank his two good companions. A message appeared before Lin saying he had used the acceleration potion to boost his speed and the Windhawk egg pill to temporarily increase his agility. He started running forward while a huge number of monsters roared, trying at least to catch him, and the young man decided to use the Blue Tide change skill. A system message appeared before the guy saying all enemies were in a soul-burned state. The attack power of all enemies weakened. He also got familiar with the Death Altar, a strange structure that continuously summons an undead creature from the underworld. But that wasn't all, since the zombie butcher was a very mysterious and dangerous creature at the same time. The young man took advantage of the Clarity Art finishing blow, put the butcher under control, and thought about the 30 seconds he needed. Now he directed a large number of monsters against them and ordered them to kill. The young man also used his skill like the Healing Arts finishing blow, a kidnapping technique, and then Knight immediately used a skill like Starflip Inner Hellfire. The Death Altar had been destroyed, and the undead summoning in that area had stopped. The report confirmed it. The young man immediately used a skill like the abduction technique against the monsters. From the next system message, our hero learned that the split zombie butchers had been defeated. The Skeleton King and the Eternal Lich had awakened. Lin thought that even on disaster difficulty level, with the current restrictions, it wasn't as terrifying as it seemed, and with his current skills and gear, playing solo was quite possible. And the young man urgently called for the Curse Master to appear, because he was the one he needed this time. A message appeared that a level 15 Cursed Dark Knight had been summoned. Our hero saddled him like a horse. Suddenly, there was a message that the undead had awakened. The young man stood atop a massive dragon and flew forward, but he had no intention of stopping. After a while, he stopped near a huge throne where another monster was seated. It was a Skeleton King. He was the one strengthening the undead creatures nearby and also used hordes to hunt enemies. An Eternal Lich who had willingly accepted the realm of death became undead through dark and necromancer magic. He was much smarter than typical undead creatures. He was also standing in front of Lin, but the young man slammed his weapon into the ground and shouted to his huge ally that they had to kill them. The guy heard someone call him master, exhaled sharply, and cursed. After a few seconds, our hero raised his hand and signaled to the knight that he could start his task. The Eternal Lich's eyes widened in surprise, his huge mouth revealing terrifying teeth, and the knight charged the attack, but our hero used a skill called Moonstrike. The nearby monsters started screaming in fear, confident in their own superiority. A massive curse shield appeared in the knight's hands. It could reflect all magical damage received within 3 seconds back to the source. The Eternal Lich screamed with all his might for the Skeleton King to help him. The monster trembled with fear, and the monster sat on his throne, his eyes burning with green fire, only opening his jaws wide. But Knight slammed his weapon on the ground and realized his opponent was him. The guy was also using the skill Tide Turn of the Blue Sea. The Sea of the Dead started reporting one after another that the Skeleton King was falling into a withering state and then into weakness. The knight applied the dragon's upward strike, 3 consecutive hits, and the monster only let out an ah, but the attacks didn't stop there. The Curse Explosion skill was applied, and the Skeleton King screamed. The Eternal Lich twisted his jaws, opened his already huge eyes wide, and shouted that it was a black hole. He started attacking our hero's knight. The knight dodged at the last moment, but still took a slight hit. The Eternal Lich was very happy about this and started laughing joyfully. He was about to self-destruct and take him with him. A violent explosion occurred, and a system message appeared saying that the undead Lich had sacrificed his own soul, nullifying all remaining health points, releasing ice magic in a wide radius and dealing damage. The knight stood beside the Skeleton King, whose health level was already 0, and informed Lin that Target 1 had been eliminated. The guy looked at what was left of the monster and happily commented that it had been a great job. Suddenly, a breeze blew, and our hour. Hero calmly spoke of the disaster ahead, and the monster said with his last strength that before him he was an ignorant fool, and that true despair lay ahead. A system message appeared indicating that by destroying the Skeleton King and the Eternal Lich, Knight had met the basic requirements to complete it. The young man approached the knight and used a healing spell to restore him. The knight began feeling around with his hands to check the integrity of his defenses, and the guy used a clarity spell, then aimed his weapon at Death Altar to destroy it as soon as possible. A report about an ancient dark-winged dragon, a former companion and partner, has come to light. Of the cursed Dark Knight who abruptly summoned it. The young man told the knight that with the altar destroyed, the undead creatures were no longer a threat and they would just finish their purge and move on to the next place. The young man looked intently ahead and announced that only the last 2 bosses remained, then added that the knight should take care of them to save time and effort moving and destroying monsters. Suddenly, a huge monster started roaring loudly and approaching our hero. Todd warned his assistant to be careful since the enemy had spotted them. The monster got closer and screamed as if it wasn't its own voice, about to devour them. But at the last moment, they dodged and stepped aside, looking at it. It was a great death dragon, revered while alive, and resurrected by the king of the dead of the necropolis after death. This information was in the system message. Since its strength, stamina, hearing, and agility stats were unknown, its huge eyes gleamed and its massive jaws lowered. Behind it was another monster. The system message indicated it was the Daughter of Death, originally a pathfinder from the elf race. Lynn asked the knight which was scarier, him or the unique secret dimension, then said she wouldn't let anyone reach level SSS. She bounced to the side and used skills like Reverse Starlight, Hellfire Illumination, Blue Flow Reversal, and Sea of the Undead. The Daughter of Death narrowed her eye and called him a despicable human ant. She asked how they dared to attack from the corner. Knight looked intently ahead and asked if they wanted to turn the tide of battle, saying he would show what a real surprise was. Our hero began attacking the opponents with such force that stones, dirt, and dust flew in all directions. The Daughter of Death laughed and said the young man's attack wasn't bad. The guy then caught the arrow she shot with his hand, gaining a health boost. The monster screeched and shouted it was impossible after all. Her arrow had hit the young man right in the heart. How was the skill ineffective? Was he really immune to submission? She told the great death dragon that the opponents were strange and ordered it to attack first. It immediately obeyed the Daughter of Death and began attacking the opponents. But to her great surprise, Lynn's health points only kept increasing. The young man stood calmly and looked at his opponents, not even thinking about running away. The Daughter of Death drew her bowstring, ready to shoot, while a knight watched from the side. Literally seconds later, he was in front of her to intercept the arrow. The monster was really pissed off by this and thought about how it couldn't let this guy get any closer. It shouted loudly so all the undead could hear its orders that they must block the enemy. The monsters tried to grab the huge knight but failed. He lunged at the Daughter of Death, and she screamed in a voice that wasn't her own. A silence magic skill was applied and the monster's health level dropped rapidly. The monster stared ahead, its eyeballs bursting from the tension, then shouted that they were fools, traitors, and could only fight in close combat. It grabbed a knight, tied some kind of object to his back, and shouted that it would make him commit suicide. It was a talisman controlling a living being, and the weaker he was, the longer the control time. Through this device, an order was sent for the creature to kill itself. The Daughter of Death drew her bowstring and shouted that even if it was only for a second, it was enough. She began attacking the knight. The knight didn't understand what was happening. His health was decreasing. Knight saw all this and shouted with all his strength for him to get into a defensive position as soon as possible. The knight began summoning a black shield, very slow due to its weight, reducing damage by 70%. The Daughter of Death was annoyed that her opponent he had taken so many hits and was still alive, but he promised to bypass the shield and finish him off. He put it into practice quickly and started attacking the knight whose health was rapidly dropping the monster. He noticed the enemy had no health left and that she would take care of him soon, then faced the companion. Seconds later, the Death's Daughter winced in pain as she was caught by the ghostly binding spell. Our hero looked at her closely, wondering what she just said, then broke the negative effect. The knight began to recover health, and the guy asked who was going to take care of whom here, the Death's Daughter. She couldn't break free from her bindings and shouted that this was happening, looked at our hero, and couldn't understand why he was still alive. But he wasn't going to answer that question. The young man used interruption skills along with a rising Dragon Strike. The boy looked intently at the dragon's daughter and said all the stars were shining. Before he could finish, a huge explosion happened and only shreds flew in all directions. After a few seconds, a message appeared before the young man saying he had killed the Death Dragon. The Death's Daughter started shouting loudly. She was so confused she couldn't find the words and then screamed as loud as she could that the opponents had no fighting ethics. Our hero was completely calm. He activated the Spirit Reversal healing skill and the Descending Calamity. There was a massive explosion, pieces of rock, dust, and dirt flew in all directions. This was Lin's way of facing the Death's Daughter. He told the knight he would handle the northwest, but he himself chose the southeast and ordered it cleared quickly. The guy thought that if they cleared the altar completely, it would end quickly because, even though the dungeon was special, it wasn't as hard as expected. He used the skill, Blue Sea Tide Reversal, Dead Sea, and reflected on the fact that they could clear the dungeon in under 10 minutes and had more than enough time. After a while, the young man stopped over a pile of skeletons that no longer posed any danger. Guy received a notification that he had destroyed the undead creatures left in the Land of Death and completed the 4/1 missions. He stared ahead, but the feeling that something was wrong gave him no peace. A notification appeared that the dark two-winged angel avatar was about to descend, and that the 5th specific quest, Choose Your Destiny, had been unlocked. A few seconds later, Knight saw huge white wings approaching quickly. A system message appeared saying he could choose between accepting the divine favor, accepting the reward from the two-winged angel Kuro, or surrendering his souls to the undead and leaving the land. After a while, the notification appeared again, suggesting killing the shadow avatar Kuro. Our hero thought about what this could mean if there was another boss hidden in this dungeon, and in front of him appeared another prompt to make a decision. The boy read that if he successfully killed the angel avatar Kuro, he would get a Q-level rating. He was surprised that the SSS rating wasn't the highest in the dungeon. The young man wondered if other adventurers knew this info or if it was being hidden. The young man stared ahead with many thoughts in his head. Suddenly, the system message appeared again before him that the dark cursed knight had left the battlefield. A summoning cooldown had triggered. Knight thought about how overwhelming the pressure was, but according to the prompt, he wouldn't have to face the creature. The young man started looking around to find the avatar Kuro and succeeded. A characterization notice for the dark two-winged angel appeared. Fighting him was not recommended and his skills were hidden. He smiled at our hero and told him he'd done well, adding that he represented the sacred realm to show his gratitude, and that the undead should rest in the ground forever. Kuro added that Lin should leave the sacred sword, the scarlet flame crown, and could leave, but the guy asked if it wasn't his right to do so, some kind of reward since he had controlled all the undead creatures here. The angel got angry and asked if the young man was questioning his words, adding that a man must have a heart full of gratitude, and told the boy to leave and not interfere with his work. Knight didn't think the angels here were that high level and used humans as cannon fodder, so he asked if there was anything else here that needed cleansing, then added that the credit belonged to him, because then he should be Kuro, and he used the universe flip skill. The angel called the young man an insignificant and added that serving the great holy realm is the highest reward for humanity, and the guy is full agreed. And defying the divine decree, the angel's expression changed very quickly, all because our hero had used the loot skill. The young man frowned, glared at Kuro, and shouted for him to shut up. These words greatly angered the angel, who shouted loudly, causing divine power to fall. There was an explosion so strong that huge stones scattered in different directions, but our hero remained unharmed. Only his hair fluttered from the force of the blast. Kuro's eyes burned with hatred as he shouted that he had revealed our hero's weaknesses, and attacked Knight with all his strength using the Scarlet Flame Crown skill. Direct hit, a huge sword pierced the young man's body, who used the Flip Heaven and Earth skill. It seemed like our hero's days were numbered, but no, his health level recovered very quickly. The angel was furious. He frowned and clenched his teeth so hard sweat beads appeared on his face. Then he shouted at the young man not to even think about using sneaky tricks to avoid divine punishment. But our hero didn't listen at all to what Kuro was saying and performed the thunder call. His health level rose significantly again. The guy clenched his teeth and used the Flip Star's skill, but the angel was not pacified. He spoke of a creature like an ant seeking death and shouted that Lin was about to see what happens when you defy a holy angel. Knight thought about how his opponent had seemed intimidating at first but no longer appeared so smart, and believed it was just a projection, not a real body. Kuro shouted how was that possible? Physical or magical attacks, ranged or close skills. He wondered why the man wasn't taking damage, but was constantly healing. The guy gained health points again, and thought about the fact that someone who had seen him defeat previous bosses wouldn't ask such a question. The angel asked if the young man was invulnerable, then shouted that such a thing could exist. Kuro had an invulnerability skill. Knight replied that he had that skill, and all Kuro could do was pull out a strand of his hair, or tear part of his clothes. The young man looked carefully ahead and decided to use the Blue Sea Strike skill, but that was not all. He activated the Divine Healing skill. Suddenly, and the disaster began to descend. The angel fell from a height with all his strength and hit hard, and his health level was insignificant. He frowned, clenched his teeth, sweat beads on his face, wanted to say something but couldn't. Our hero took advantage of a new skill. It was a Healing Arts Strike. After a few seconds, a message appeared before Lin saying he had killed the angel's two-winged projection. Kuro, the unique Death Earth dungeon was completed and the reward calculation had started with an additional diamond chest received. The guy reached the top rank, read that the secret realm would soon disappear, and the accumulated power would materialize into an exclusive reward. A system message appeared informing him that he had received an exclusive weapon of unknown quality, the Shimmering Moon Shadow Blade. The young man took it in his hands and began examining it carefully, realizing it was unique. A notification appeared with the weapon's stats, as well as information that absorbing similar weapons improves quality, improves the blade's stats. Also, Lin read that the weapon has a redemption mode. Each strike grants redemption energy, and a destruction mode that turns the blade into a weapon that deals damage. But that wasn't all. Since the lunar shadow form dealt physical damage and restored health based on the damage dealt, and the sword also had the Mu Marina death trait, the silent destruction feature allowed you to create a powerful strike that would hit all enemies hard. It also had a trait like the Shadow Rift, Lunar. A notification appeared that the sword could heal or kill, and Knight thought that the 3 forms and 3 insults were an almost perfect combo with his innate insults. He opened the diamond chest and got 20 free points, an ice bow, a diamond skill, a platinum set, and thought he had been lucky. Our hero decided to invest all his points into intelligence, and also said that his stats, based on the message data, were now roughly at the level of a level 20 professional. The young man reflected that this was just his first goal and leveled up. He stopped near the portal and thought that as long as the Goddess of Luck's Gaze buff was active, he should clear a couple of level 10 dungeons. The boy's voice came from the bushes, gritting his teeth, saying he was waiting for Knight. This made Knight turn his head in confusion at the sound and asked his opponent who the boy was. The boy started waving his weapon and shouted like a maniac that today was Lin's time to die. The madman yelled that it was our hero who ruined his reputation, and added that everyone wanted him dead just for taking his guide, and said that everyone had turned their backs on him. The guy grabbed his weapon and asked if the boy was done while thinking that he had warned the students not to waste time because of anger, and the students promised not to get involved. At first, Lin wanted to teach him a lesson and struck the opponent himself, telling him that selling manuals was illegal and slander was too. The boy fell to the ground, frowned, clenched his teeth, and his whole body trembled with fine shakes and rage. But barely a second later, he was back on his feet. He lunged at the guy with wild eyes and spit flying in all directions. Our hero opened his eyes and mouth wide and then reported that this was a demonic aura. He looked at the boy and wondered if Cao Juan was really in front of him. The boy opened his eyes wide, frowned, clenched his teeth, and sweat droplets appeared on his face. The demon whispered to Cao to tell him he was not like a knight and that everyone despised him. The demon whispered to the young man that no one in this world cared about him. It also emphasized that no one wanted to deal with him and added that Juan was nothing but a pile of dog crap that made geniuses shine even brighter, and if he didn't accept his role, he'd be hated even more. Cao got angry and shouted he would kill the knight, and the demon whispered that it was okay and that he would gain power beyond the heavens and change his whole life. The boy dropped to his knees and began begging Magauzan to grant him the power of the abyss. Then Juan stood up, looked up, and announced he no longer wanted to be human. Lin pointed at him and observed that the boy was spoiled by the abyss and added that he had been infected by an abyss demon. Joan ran toward our hero and realized that the abyss power was so strong that his body had become so powerful. Knight said the guy had the chance to stop, and if he continued, there would be no choice but to kill him. There's a clause in the Professional Alliance Code that specifies what to do when encountering a brat. Cao laughed and asked Lin if he really could kill him. He started swinging and yelling that this was his punishment, then made a horizontal sword strike, an abyss version. Our hero fell to the ground, but the enemy still managed to hurt him. A notification appeared that he was under invasion by abyss forces and all his stats were reduced, damage increased, and he was affected by a permanent bleeding effect. Our hero stood up, really pissed off, and literally stood there thinking for a few seconds. A weapon appeared in his hands, and the boy told Joe not to blame him and used a lunar shadow flash to retrieve the sword, while thinking to himself that the boy was no match for him, even if he chose the power of the abyss. His opponent looked really angry, locked eyes, clenched his teeth, and Knight thought he was just a level 10 boss. Cao shouted that it was exactly as he thought. Lin was just a priest relying solely on power and added that he was already a corpse. Then he started laughing cheerfully. The young man thought that, in that case, there was no need to use the heaven and earth strike at the same time. He realized there were abyss demons nearby, and if they noticed, he had a skill like invulnerability, and decided to inform the others it would be to his detriment. John looked at his weapon and wondered how it was possible. Even with all the daisies, he had no idea how Knight could deal so much damage with a single hit. Our hero looked at his opponent and thought the guy had no theoretical knowledge, nor observational skills. Cao didn't notice the magical damage and needed to hurry to attract the demons. The fat guy started running away, bleeding from his wounds and cursing. The young man gripped his weapon tighter. He wondered what he should do to keep John alive if he caught the demons. The demon realized it was most likely that using a pawn like this wouldn't work, and that a swordsman with enhanced artifacts wouldn't be able to defeat the priest. He was using Cao in his dark schemes and thought about capturing the knight. Anyway, the demon remembered John Xiaofeng, who had noticed Lin's invincibility, and decided to act through him. The monster needed our hero to agree to work for him, making a great addition to his master's army. Cao's eyes burned like a madman's. He gave a caustic smile, and the demon thought he preferred the second option. John didn't stop. He laughed like a madman and tried to attack our hero. The villain shouted at Knight if he was surprised and added that the real test was about to begin, but our hero remained completely calm. He stared at the boy and recovered his health. This upset Cao a lot. He was so angry he clenched his teeth and his face turned purple. Lin looked carefully ahead and asked John, after all, wasn't he a demon from the abyss? The boy shouted that the Alliance pros were on their way and that he didn't have time to waste on him. So the guy had to hurry up and die, but the young man slung his weapon over his back, put his other hand in his pocket, and looked at his opponent. With a smile, the abyss demon through Cao told him he could choose the best option, join them. Our hero looked closely at his opponent and smiled, thinking to himself that he had them caught. Then he asked if he intended to join them and asked what advantages the abyss demon could offer him. John began wondering if one sentence still wasn't enough for the guy and raised his hands, then asked if the guy could see the power of the abyss. The guy said it was very powerful and interesting. Lin asked if John Xiaofeng's opponent knew John Xiaofeng since he had rejected his comrade's invitation and had even given them a good scolding. Cao replied that he had invited him personally, but the brat didn't understand what was being offered and dared to insult the power of the abyss. Our hero clarified if the boy had given the idiot a chance, but in the end, it was all in vain. Indeed, when the abyss demon approached John, he told him to get out the door. John held his head and said it was ridiculous, asking if Xiaofeng didn't know his limits. The young man thought about the fact that it was very likely John wasn't hiding or lying about anything, and most likely this demon's intelligence was on the same level as his. Knight said that if the guy gained the abyss's power, he might expose himself and become a target for the Alliance hunters, adding they better give it to him and that he had already earned the Alliance's trust and could quickly rise to leadership, secretly plunging humanity into chaos and destroying the damn world. John asked why the young man wanted to destroy the entire world, saying it wasn't a popular personality. Lin replied that lolis are all hypocrites, and added that their parents died because they were weak and no one protected them, ignored them, and their mom and dad distracted the monster so they could survive but were brutally killed. Knight. He said that professionals exploit the weak, that there's no justice among people, only greed and selfishness, and added that everyone deserves to die. The opponent stared at the guy, his eyes filled with tears, and he started to agree with our hero's words. He began to swell like a balloon and shouted that he could feel the young man's pain. A monster emerged from Wan and started telling the guy to come join the Abyss family, promising to grant him the Abyss's supreme power. The monster smiled and said it was better to destroy this trash world together. The young man separated his hands and waited for the demon of the Abyss to give him the power in his hands. Then he quietly called the Moonlight Blade so the demon wouldn't hear. Then he smiled and began talking about activating destruction mode. The guy tried to use his skills and gripped his weapon tighter. The monster's eyes widened, his pupils narrowed to dots, and he asked Lin if he was playing with him or being sincere. The guy started attacking his opponent. A notification alerted him that his damage increased by 50%, but he didn't stop and used the Stellar Light skill, Inverse Fall into Hell. The demon's health dropped fast, and he started screaming and falling. Our hero realized he had received a damage boost and began to activate the Blue Sea Wave skill, the Sea of the Dead. The Abyss Demon's health was at minimum, in a combustion state, and his attack power was drastically reduced, so the young man had no intention of stopping and kept attacking. The monster shouted that this was madness, and asked what was wrong with that man, why he dealt so much damage. The guy applied the Inverse Divine Calamity healing skill, and the Abyss Demon was inflicted with a bleeding debuff. He thought it wasn't surprising that Wan couldn't defeat Lin even with the Abyss's power. He realized no one could beat him, and mentally begged for help. Knight asked the monster if he was running away and added that he had revealed his true form and couldn't trust his shadow clone. The Abyss Demon shouted, surprised that the guy knew his skills from the start and had set a trap by sacrificing himself to capture his true form. Our hero's eyes burned with fire as he calmly said, "That's how at Island." The monster used the Abyss Hand's skill and shouted that Lin was a traitor and that he would fight him with all his strength. He looked at the guy with hatred and yelled that he had already used up his blitz. In fact, the young man's health began to drop rapidly, and then the Abyss Demon used his new skill, Abyss Claw, and sarcastically said he'd see how the young man dodged it. The monster got excited, laughed joyfully, and realized the guy had fallen into a trap. But Knight responded that it was the end, but only for the Abyss Demon. His health started to rise, while the monsters dropped rapidly. Our hero used the inverse healing skill, but calmly watched the enemy, who quickly began to fall, his health already at 0. After a while, a system message appeared notifying that the Abyss Demon had been killed. Lin received a Moonlight Blade that began absorbing the Abyss Demon's remaining soul. The guy picked it up and thought about the fact that in real battles, experience doesn't accumulate, but now he knows how weapons grow and improve in quality by killing Abyss Demons. The young man wondered if they could only improve with the souls of abyss demons or if they could absorb the souls of any creature. The boy shouted, "What just happened?" The girl answered that she didn't know, that things weren't clear. They called the professionals because someone was lying on the ground. Someone said the city's professional patrol service had already been notified, and they wouldn't be long. Knight thought about what to tell the Alliance that the growth weapon had absorbed the soul of an abyss demon. He heard the patroller yell at him to take off his gear and drop his weapon on the ground, and the guy had absorbed the soul of an abyss demon. He heard the patrolman shout at him to take off his gear and drop his weapon, and the guy was about to leave when the man yelled at him not to move, to put his hands behind his head, or else they'd have the right to attack him immediately. Our hero dropped the weapon from his hands and said he would follow orders. Completely calm, the young man used a skill, a slight paralytic effect, and the patrolman apologized, lowered his weapon, and said the guy wouldn't feel any pain and that it was standard procedure. Handcuffs appeared on Lin's wrists, and he thought that the professionals in front of him were responsible for keeping the city safe and that it wasn't worth causing a conflict with them. Other patrol officers checked for signs of battle at the scene, provided medical attention, gathered information, and calmed the residents. The young man looked around and realized that the people who had arrived were doing their jobs. One of the men ran to the lead officer and reported that they found a badly injured human student, unconscious but showing traces of abyss power. He was probably a corrupted abyss demon. The team leader didn't understand anything as they found the corpse of the abyss demon. The man noticed a level 20 abyss demon covered in sword wounds, obviously. Killed by the longsword expert they had just captured. The patrol officers were watching camera footage, and someone asked why only a skeleton remained. The young men frowned. Sweat drops appeared on their faces, unable to believe it was possible. A system message appeared above Knight with his name, level, and personality description. The patrol officers couldn't believe he was the one who killed the abyss demon, but someone recognized him and said it was brilliant. A young man approached, greeted Lin, and realized it was Wang Machao, the captain of the first Abyss Demon Extermination Squad of the Professional Alliance. He immediately asked if he had killed the Abyss Demon and clarified if that half-dead student had been corrupted by that monster. Then the young man subdued him. Our hero replied that it was him and realized that Wan had become corrupted before his eyes and tried to kill him. That's why he took action. Wang asked how he captured the demon since Abyss Demons hide their form. Knight explained he believed the demon was watching its victim from afar, and when it saw its failure, it possessed him and pretended to offer power. That's when it revealed its true form to also give power. The young men opened their mouths, amazed, and asked if all this was possible. Machao thought it wasn't easy to fool such a cunning abyss demon. But after all, Lin was a student about to take a professional exam. The man said Knight had handled both the corrupted demon and its true form without help. Then he offered our hero to cooperate and join them in the Alliance. Aliens. One of the patrol officers realized he wasn't just any student and asked the captain if he hadn't heard about his reputation, adding that the guy was very famous. Wang frowned and said he wasn't connected, but given the seriousness of the situation, they had to follow standard procedure. He addressed the guy in words he understood and added that it might affect his upcoming professional exam plans, but no exceptions could be made. Our hero looked carefully ahead and thought about the effect of the goddess of luck's gaze fading away. He sighed heavily and reflected on the fact that his advantage in the professional exam was still huge. His performance had surpassed the goal even before reaching the mark. The young man told the captain he understood and fully supported his fight against the abyss demons. The man in the white robe told Wang Machao there was no need to bring Lin Knight back to the department for investigation or surveillance. He was the captain's boss and added that they would handle the guy after the exam. The man broke into a sweat and said it was all part of standard procedure and couldn't be skipped. He added that if he let the young man go, he would be punished at headquarters. The boss pointed out that no one would bother Wang. After all, it wasn't just his decision. It was a directive from the president and all other department heads, including the famous Curse Master, and added that the young man had managed on his own without injury and had qualified for the Forgotten Nest. Our hero scratched his head, but first thought that the internet rumors were exaggerated. But the captain looked at the young man and worried whether he truly had an unprecedented divine ability or talent. Knight asked his boss if he was going to be interrogated. He said no, and told him to focus on preparing his cases. Also, the man in the white robe said if the guy needed anything, he could feel free to call the professionals for help. Wang, folding his arms, began to apologize and said he still had a question for Lin. The young man grabbed the sword and the captain asked if this matter was related to the previous incident reported by Wan Xiaofeng. Our hero said this demon Mego, the same one who failed to bite Wan after his plan failed, turned to Cao Zhuan and thought of Wang himself. As a professional, while connecting the two events, the boss realized that Xiaofeng's constitution after the test confirmed he was 1 in a million, the genius of the corrupt abyss demon. Knight realized he easily tricked the demon, while Wan remained unharmed. The man in the white robe said our hero was capable of facing the monster, capturing the corrupt, and gathering valuable information, and he did it better than the lazy, highly professional fighters. The The boss allowed Lin to leave but told him he wanted to discuss something not publicly and asked him to clear the area. The man in the white robe ordered to clear the zone, and Wang Machao said to take the team and hand over the weapons to Knight. The captain advised the first active squad to collect and leave the area, and then apologized to our hero for his recklessness. The young man replied it was okay. The guy activated confidential mode. The boss noticed the area was cleared. Our hero revealed an exclusive growth weapon. He realized he got it when he cleared the Deathland, the flickering hidden moonlight. But after killing the demon, the weapon absorbed its power. The man was very surprised, widening his eyes and mouth in disbelief, and Knight said there's little info on growth weapons. Even the best libraries don't have detailed descriptions, and added he wanted to ask if a growth weapon could level up after killing an abyss demon in the real world. The man pointed out that finding such a weapon is like looking for a needle in a haystack, and only 3 such weapons have been found since the Union, but it's classified info, and he doesn't know all the details. Then he added he could say one thing. From what he knew, cultivation weapons could gain experience by defeating monsters in dungeons and leveling up that way, but no weapon gained demon power. Our hero looked intently ahead and wondered if his was the first. The boss confirmed it was true, and thanked the young man for trusting him and sharing important info with the Union. Knight revealed he thought that, although the flickering moonlight was the first weapon to gain experience from killing dungeon demons, there were likely other similar weapons, and added it wasn't the only one and that more such weapons could appear in the future, but they might be a counterattack against the abyss demons and would be an advantage for humanity. The boss said that was good news, but better not announce publicly yet. An innocent person has trouble because of his wealth. Such a rare precious jade can cause envy and jealousy. If the whole younger generation shared Knight's view, the alliance would be much more stable and strong. The man said he would report the matter and that the Union would take it seriously, but it was better if Lin used this time to prepare for the professional trial, and added that after the test, the Union would contact the young man. Knight replied he understood everything, and our hero continued on his way. Within minutes, he met the captain. The man greeted the boy and said he looked forward to joining the alliance and becoming one of them, and asked to be called Old Man. Wang and the young man agreed and continued on their way. The boss asked Tianqi what he thought about our hero's file, which was on the table. Tianqi replied that Knight not only had extraordinary strength but was also a calm person, someone who thought big and planned ahead. Shangwen Yang was that kind of person. Tianqi smiled and added that he was thinking about the fact that Yang was the leader of this generation. The man in the white tailcoat took a sip of his glass and said it was hard to say all this because young people have their own customs, then added that the fact Lin could get a weapon that targets dungeon monsters was very surprising at that moment. A black grime spread under the table where the Knight Alliance members sat. Knight entered the room and loudly said he was back, but no one answered him. Mumu found out the guy was already home and even saw him but didn't go to greet him. Instead, she hid behind the couch. The young man started looking around, scratching his head with his hand. He said nothing, then looked closely ahead and said he could see Mumu sitting behind the couch. His told Lin that at least he could pretend to be New Pugin, and asked if the girl hadn't said she'd work hard but was resting and snacking at home. Mumu immediately got serious and showed the guy a system message indicating she was level 10. Our hero's mouth dropped in surprise. He couldn't believe she reached that level so fast. His times wondered how the boy would react. Would he be shocked? He added they could play together. The young man replied that it depended on her stats because he'd been working a lot lately, and most likely hadn't slept at night. The girl said no, and Lin said Mumu stayed up all night working for him. He glared at her. ISU winked and asked our hero if he still hadn't realized. He answered that it was all biometric tears and then reported that the new skill only requires clearing the dungeon solo, and she could directly receive rewards from the dungeon's treasure chest. The secret realm, he tried a bit. The young man was surprised and asked if he meant that biometric tears had no time or distance limit and allowed solo dungeon clearing without supervision. Mumu confirmed and added she was currently in the Lake Ness Monster's nightmare. She added that judging by the system's hint, the secret realm's final boss was severely injured and should be defeated soon. Knight said that's how her talent helps her level up by playing anytime and tracking progress in real time. His replied that it can help everyone and asked if the young man was jealous of her. He cheerfully said he'd also like to have such a versatile assistant and then asked if there was a fatigue limit for the skill. He also clarified if she could enter secret worlds without restrictions. Mumu said otherwise. She wouldn't have reached level 10 and asked why Lin was so clueless today. The guy answered he was just surprised she had such a useful talent and added that in that case, he should change his point allocation strategy from 10 to 20. The girl looked closely at the young man and asked what he just said, clarifying what other point allocation system existed. The young man replied he already had such a system and needed to adjust the best point allocation method based on her talent, skills, and current equipment. His smile accepted it and said he'd send it to our hero immediately. The guy looked closely at the phone screen and realized he also had to include height, weight, and volumes. Mumu got very excited and asked Linju what all this was for. He answered it was to better assess her skill level and added that her scores in the would directly affect the properties of the biometric tiers, giving her more advantages. The guy said that in low-level battles, it didn't matter if you won against a small monster, but in high-level battles, the little details decided everything. Would directly affect the properties of biometric tiers, which would give more advantages. The guy said in low-level battles, it didn't matter if you won against a small monster, but in high-level battles, the little details decided everything. Even a small difference in stats could change the outcome. He said he knew all that, but what did his measurements have to do with it? Then he asked him to forget everything and wait a moment. Knight also asked if Babe wanted to change jobs and asked Mumu if he could provide the data since he felt awkward asking that, and added that if she didn't want to give it, that was a personal matter. The girl frowned and asked the young man if he wanted to know other people's data. The guy lifted his head, sweat beads appearing on his face, and said he just wanted to help his teammates get an advantage. He sat down with the measurements in his hands and wondered if this wasn't just a number, if there was something more important than getting stronger. He remembered his childhood and thought about the fact they had been together since they were kids and Lin had seen everything long ago. The girl blushed and thought about being a little annoyed about having to give exact measurements. She started measuring the circumference of her chest, looked at the numbers, and thought about how it was still 80B even though she'd been drinking so much milk and nothing had grown. Mumu gritted her teeth and wondered if Knight would use this to tease her. She grabbed her head with her hands and said that when they did the checkup, they aligned her at 80C, and if the young man found out everything, how could she keep her composure in the future? So she decided to use data that wasn't hers, because it was the same as hers and no one would know. The girl thought her pink assistant had finished with the other girls and called her, who appeared very quickly. Mumu started taking measurements while asking to be measured. The young man looked ahead at the closed doors and wondered what she was doing there so long. After 10 minutes, the girl announced she had finished the test and added that he could look at it but shouldn't show it to others. The guy looked closely at the sheet and asked if these were definitely in her measurements and added that there was some problem here. He clarified if the ADC data was accurate and pointed out that it seemed too large if it wasn't. She blushed and answered that she got those numbers during her last physical exam. Lin said calmly if the data was wrong, her strategy would be useless. The girl snatched the sheet from the young man, frowned, and began correcting the data, saying this time everything was accurate. Knight smiled and replied that was better. Then he gave Mumu a tap on the forehead, who screamed. She stared at him and asked if he had asked for the data there. The girl squinted and calmly replied that Bei refused to give it to her, realizing that the other told her she couldn't bother the big boss and she shouldn't worry about a problem like that. She also mentioned that Ji said Lin had already given her so much good equipment and resources, and she had earned some money and points. Then Mumu laughed and pointed out that the silly girl wasn't afraid to show her data, but thought attribute points were useless. Still, she gave her medical research data. Knight grabbed his head and said if it weren't for Bei, he would have thought she was trying to attract someone else. Then he added that from what he knew about her, the girl really didn't want to bother others and was afraid they'd think she didn't trust them. The guy grabbed his phone and started transmitting data to himself, commenting they should help Bei since she had a lot of talent. Mumu wanted to tell the guy something about Ji's talent, but he turned his head to the side and looked very surprised. The pink assistant Mumu said the system had sent a notification that her lady had obtained the new skill, Soul Summon Bell, that could call spirits for battle. Knight was very surprised and asked if that could also summon him. He clarified not everyone played with Matryoshka dolls, held up a finger, and replied it wasn't the same but completely different. He said the spirit summoning skill could only be used in secret dungeons. Unlike Mumu, it couldn't be summoned in reality. And if a spirit died, it could be revived. The girl spread her hands and said she didn't know anything else, because she hadn't tried it yet. The boy replied that he understood now, snapped his fingers, and commented that the celestial system was unnecessary and suggested they go to the dungeon to test the effects. After a while, the young people were near a secret dungeon called the Lizardman Tribe. Before them appeared a system message with its description and complexity. Mumu Allen asked, surprised, wondering if he had changed his weapon into a knife form. The young man looked at the girl and replied that she could try it. She didn't refuse the offer, and her assistant Rosa was left amazed. Mumu's health level skyrocketed, and she asked her clone if she had seen that trick. She closed her eyes and reported that there was nothing surprising about it, then said she had something more interesting to show and added that the bionic tear was using the exclusive soul summoning bell skill and held a bell in her hands. A notification appeared warning that an unknown spirit had heard the bell sounds and had contacted the world and would soon descend into the dungeon. Our hero stared at her, eyes and mouth wide open, surprised. A lot of noise was made, and that's how the spirit started approaching them. Dust flew in different directions as it appeared. A system message revealed that the giant guardian tree spirit had already descended. A huge monster appeared in front of the youths, its evil eyes glowing from the notification. They could see the spirit's level, its abilities, and its description. Lin thought that although the monster was gold quality, it was obviously a high-level boss with traits beyond the gold tier. He thought that if Mumu leveled up later, she'd be able to summon even stronger bosses of the appropriate level. The guy realized the spirit summoning bell was similar to the item used to summon a cursed master. Knight noticed that the girl's talent allowed her to summon her elder brother. From the start, without any cooldown restrictions, he looked at her and realized she could be considered a semi-divine level talent. The young man covered his face with his hand and shouted at the girl to hurry up and check the spirit. She turned her head, smiled, and responded that she would follow the young man's instructions. And Mumu shouted at the guardian tree to step forward and take out those lizards. Not far from the monster, several small but agile monsters were jumping and crying out. The spirit began watching them. A greenish smoke drifted from its eye sockets as it called its opponents ants. They really were tiny, but the guardian tree didn't hesitate much. It started attacking them with a celestial strike. A violent explosion erupted, and a blaze lit up the entire area. The spirit used its ability, dealing massive damage to its foes and creating a shockwave that followed up with a second strike after the first. The tree giant looked ahead and told the enemies to rest in peace. Our hero squinted his eyes, thinking that the heavenly strike reminded him of that Goblin King's skill. He realized this giant's attack range was much wider and the damage far greater. The guy asked Mumu if she could try fighting it. She was very surprised by the question, but answered that the giant was now her co-commander, and that she couldn't just sit back and relax since another boss lay ahead, and this was a good chance to see the guardian tree fight solo. But the young man smiled and said it was just bionic tears. He spotted his pink assistant, who widened her eyes and declared she refused. Knight's eyes also widened as he wondered if she could be revived, then said it didn't matter and told them to leave the guardian tree until the next zone. The lizardman boss preferred to trust the Wood Brothers' abilities and added that he would handle the rest himself. Our hero pushed off the ground, jumped so high he soared over the guardian tree, which was surprised. The guy attacked the lizard hard, its health dropping fast. Lin thought that there was no critical hit. He couldn't kill his opponent with a basic strike. The young man couldn't think of anything better but drew his weapon. In seconds, he had killed the lizardman's guardian. His eyes widened as he told Knight that the damage from his base strike was very high. The young man thought it seemed the spectral moon tone had received many bonuses, and because it usually struck from a distance, the healing skill numbers changed. The guy was very aware that the lunar shadow's advantage was that the faster the attack speed, the greater the bonus. He concluded this only applied to normal monsters since the angelic ghost completely ignored physical damage. It needed to rely on reverse healing skills to quickly defeat enemies. Lin gripped his weapon tighter, and before him appeared a notification that a silent destruction moment had occurred. The lizardman's health was dropping fast, and they tried to dodge the attack. Seconds later, a system message appeared. They quickly and tried to dodge the attack, and a few seconds later a system message appeared, informing that the group of lizardmen had been destroyed. Mumu watched everything closely, and thought about how Lin had become even stronger and she couldn't keep up with him. The bionic tears offered to destroy the enemies together with the guardian tree, and it accepted. Knight gripped the weapon tighter in his hands and realized it was also his time to show himself. Then he thought it was time to see the power of the moon's shadow between the cracks and the oath of the ocean and moon. The youths advanced and suddenly saw a message saying they had reached a tribe of lizardmen and that 300 warriors would fight to the death against them to protect their tribe and leader. He said that 300 level 10 lizard guards would do enough damage, and Lim commented that he would handle the healing and keep the guardian tree alive. The bionic tears told the giant to run to the walls and destroy them. A system message appeared and Frank Enro meshit, indicating that the guardian tree's motorcycle had entered recharge mode and could speed up later. Then it started attacking its enemies that swarmed him in great numbers. The mummies with bionic tears didn't stay on the sidelines either, but fought against the lizard men. Our hero used the lunar shadow formula and thought that invulnerability to any damage for 3 seconds, increased movement speed, and the ability to travel hundreds of meters in an instant were very important. A notification appeared that the guy had summoned an illusory lunar Medusa. He was informed that all debuffs on him and his target would be removed. The next message revealed that the skill made him and his target regenerate health every half second for 15 seconds. A few seconds later, the main boss of the lizard men appeared at the forest edge, extremely angry. The bionic tears and asked the great guardian tree to fight with all its strength and show what it could do, and immediately used a desperate strike. The monsters scattered in all directions and began shouting. Knight watched everything happening and thought about the fact that the bionic tear was intelligent and didn't need more instructions from Mumu, and the great guardian tree only obeyed her. The guy realized the giant was very strong but had obvious weaknesses. It had many melee skills, and in the future, it would have many advantages against highly agile classes. Our hero thought he had already seen enough and tested most of the spectral lunar shadow's abilities, so the young man decided to apply the powers of inverse stellar and inverse hell. A few seconds later, a system message appeared indicating the young man had defeated the lizard men dungeon boss. The young man, with a serious expression, started looking around but didn't show any joy. The guardian tree said it could feel it and was very familiar with this power but couldn't figure out what it was. Our hero stared intently at the giant and just let out a chuckle after saying that. The guardian tree then said that before returning to the soul realm, it wanted to ask Lin a favor. The boy asked what kind of favor and thought to himself that this creature had consciousness, which surprised him. He frowned and thought it wasn't surprising they said the giant tree couldn't be revived and that it was a unique summon. The young man remembered a knight who is wise and has his own memories but is just a ghost, a summoner among his kind, and if killed, can resurrect multiple times. Knight asked the giant what it wanted to ask. He realized it was an intelligent being from another world, and the giant tree said it sincerely hoped the young man could take its mistress to the Forgotten Lair. The giant said it had high hopes that the young man had a special mark granting access to that place, and added that his mistress also had access and could go with him. Lin looked closely ahead and wondered who the giant tree was talking about and who he was. His opponent stayed silent for a moment, then said he was talking about the bionic tears, adding that he was just a nameless guard. Knight ordered the giant tree, who was kneeling, to stand up and start. Suddenly, a system message appeared saying the Lizardmen tribe quest had been completed, and that a silver chest would be obtained and whether or not the button to open it was pressed. Our hero told the giant that he first had to respond to the notice. Before he could answer, he started pushing something and told Mumu that they had to get out of here first, and she agreed, staring intently at the young man, thinking about what had happened, while Lin thought that according to universal knowledge, the talents of awakened adventurers were always effective for awakened adventurers in a symbiotic relationship. No matter how strong the awakened talent is, it will fade in this world, and although there are biological traits, summoned beings will protect their host. But bionic tears can summon beings from other worlds, allowing them to be autonomous. And it even has a pass to enter a forgotten lair. Knight wondered what kind of creature it was. He was worried that his Mumu and even all of humanity could be in danger. He realized they couldn't let the hidden threats to humanity go unpunished, and they had to deal with them immediately. Lin told the girl he had something to do and that she could come back later or do other tasks. She accepted. The young man turned his head to the side and examined the bionic tears. Mumu saw all this, opened her eyes and mouth wide, and asked if something was wrong. The guy looked at his phone screen and replied that he was fine but needed some time and wanted to warn her in advance. He approached the window again, put the phone to his ear, and asked his opponent if he was free at that moment or not. After a while, he was at Juan's house. Juan, the man, asked what had happened with such urgency that he needed to talk to him in person. Our hero said he was a high-ranking employee and that he should know he had the qualifications, enough to enter the Forgotten Lair. Juan smiled and replied that if the guy wanted to ask why no one had informed them about this dungeon. The young man said that was one of the questions and clarified if the man was worried that it might affect his way of thinking and wanted our hero to undergo a professional test at first. Khan sighed heavily and said that was one of the reasons but pointed out that he could tell him. The man was silent for a moment and reported that Lin might not know how complicated that dungeon was, adding that it was a dozen times harder than the secret world dungeon that Knight had found before. Even the smallest monsters' levels started at Diamond. Many participants were unable to escape and eventually died. Juan realized that geniuses granted entry rights were still afraid to use them, and our hero realized it was because the equipment and skills were above Diamond level. The man replied that was indeed true, because only legendary level gear could defeat the boss, and if someone cleared it alone, they would receive mythical level equipment and skills. The young man thought that everyone was worried he might become arrogant. He considered that if he were like Wan Feng, thinking his talent and strength were invincible and recklessly rushed there, he would die immediately. The guy rested his beard on his hands and asked what level was required to enter that dungeon. Juan replied 15 and said that was the minimum requirement, but advised waiting until 20 and synchronizing all equipment and skills before planning to go there. The knight smiled and told him to be sure he wasn't that reckless, since the dungeon was so important that he would prepare properly and treat it like a professional test. The man said there was another reason he wanted to talk about it and said that most of the Alliance forces had recently focused on tracking the Abyss demons, and added that they had gotten cocky and the knight had almost been caught by them. Juan added that recently a fallen white jester had appeared, and they had also learned that Abyss demons had infiltrated the Alliance with many spies. Juan said they would definitely take action with Yang Cheng, and that adventurers shouldn't let past tragedies. Juan said they would definitely do something about Yang Cheng, and that adventurers shouldn't let the tragedies of the past happen again. The man warned that there might be changes in future events, and that Lin should closely follow his new notifications. Knight didn't understand anything, and his opponent said the Alliance had announced they might lock down the entire city just in case, and that there would be a purge of internal staff, looking for those inclined to corruption. Juan declared a professional trial was approaching and they couldn't let these rats influence the candidates. That's why they weren't publicizing the news to avoid panic. He also told the young man not to worry about the Abyss demons and to focus on his studies. He said they had the situation under control and even if someone infiltrated the staff, they would take care of it. The young man took a sip from his glass and said he had another question. The guy thought about whether the awakened talent of a professional belonged to the summoning type, and if summoned beings came from another world, there was a possibility of betrayal. Suddenly, the man calmly said, "No, there was no such possibility," and there was a pause in the room. Our hero looked at his opponent and his eyes widened in surprise. Juan said the young man should know that awakened talent is symbiotic with professionalism and that this power develops within each one. It's like the most important brain that lives and dies with them, their most reliable ally. The man explained that no matter what it asks for or what world it's from, it wouldn't pose a danger to a professional's life. Juan emphasized to our hero that the creature still obeys its master unconditionally. Ken revealed they had tested it in combat. Even high-level control abilities that could influence others' thoughts couldn't make the summoned creatures attack their summoner. The boy thought for a moment and asked what would happen if an abyss demon was summoned. The man replied that wouldn't happen and said there were such talents in the alliance. The abyss demons summoned by him wouldn't call people to join the abyss, but would instead join the abyss forces and become informants. The man adjusted his glasses and asked if Knight had awakened such a talent or someone else. The young man replied it was his girlfriend and co-commander Lin. He frowned and talked about how the girl's talent had summoned a creature from another world, and it felt it had permission to enter the Forgotten Nest and asked to go there together. Juan stood up surprised and wondered if the creature also had permission to enter. The boy hesitated and said the spirit mentioned something there, but he wasn't very sure. The man looked out the window and said it wouldn't betray his friend and told the young man he could keep it, but that they had to inform the Alliance. Juan said his friend was a promising big shot, and if the Alliance confirmed the creature was summoned by awakened talent, they wouldn't restrict its actions in cities populated by humans. He smiled and added to reassure Knight that the Alliance wouldn't investigate his girlfriend but rather value those people, and supported their development. Our hero clenched his fists and thought to stay calm while realizing he didn't like being tense and losing control. The man looked at the young man and asked if he had asked everything he wanted and said he wanted the boy to ask one more question. He grabbed a folder from his desk and said he had an autopsy report on the Abyss Demon, and according to the findings, the real cause of death could have been a prepared magical attack. He added that the Abyss Demon seemed to have died burned, but in reality, its cells and organs were depleted and atrophied, and its functions had suddenly stopped. Wang noted it was similar to the effects of the old paraquat and clarified that maybe it was Knight's awakened talent, the poison milk technique. The guy picked up the papers and thought about the fact that the forensic expert was a professional who had thoroughly analyzed the effects of the reversal treatment and answered the man's speculation. Juan laughed cheerfully and said they had even argued about it for a long time. He added they wondered if Lin had injured the Abyss Demon. Some experts believe the other professional had already injured it several times, letting the guy take advantage of the situation. The man added that then they argued whether the feat would be credited to him. This surprised the young man, and Juan was surprised the man didn't know about the rewards for Abyss Demons. He revealed that the Alliance rewards any professional who has killed an Abyss Demon and told the boy to wait for the award ceremony to receive the prize he desired, adding that the young man could specify the items he wanted. Our hero thought for a moment and asked if he would send him information about the needed items. The man answered affirmatively. Lin stood up and said he would return to his place because he had to take his companions to the dungeon. Swan approached the young man and wished him good luck in his professional test, then clenched his fist and added that the boy would claim first place and bring glory to the whole city. Knight replied that he would do his best, then asked if the man had bet on him, and the man just laughed. That same day, after lunch, Lin saw Bao and started calling the girl because he knew she was looking for him. She looked at the boy and said she had made up her mind. She had a folder in her hands, and Cao noticed that it contained all her data and information. The boy was thinking that he hadn't expected the girl to trust him so much and couldn't betray her sincerity. He needed to think things over carefully. He put a hand on Bao's shoulder and told her not to worry, mentioning that her talent would increase to level 2 and that he would take her to the next paired dungeon. The young man looked at the girl and told her they would study whether she should change classes based on what they had read. Cao was very excited. Her eyes shone with joy and she replied that she would prepare well. The girl started running and shouted that she would continue training since her fatigue level wasn't at its max yet. Lin was very surprised, rubbed his forehead with his hand, and said he wouldn't break her fighting spirit for now. The young man thought about taking the data from the previous dungeon, adding the current information and making calculations. He sat in front of the computer and considered that the data on current skills and equipment were fully recorded, but also very important were the range, muscle movements in the dungeon, reaction time, and habitual actions. The guy realized that BYG's current data wasn't entirely accurate yet. Since all three had gone through the dungeon last time, Lin noticed that for now, BY wasn't outstanding in anything other than being a successful amateur. But he decided to prepare a plan so that even without revealing her talent, the girl could pass the final test and be accepted. He realized that the class change challenge was a solo dungeon and luck alone wasn't enough for him. Smoking, Phelan was in the dungeon and reported that Lord Magao had been killed, Black Fist fallen. replied that he knew and offered to take down whoever killed him. There was another guy nearby who also asked if they would finish off Magao's killer. It was Cardboard Fallen who realized there were spies pro-alliance everywhere at that moment, and that revealing the Abyss's power was worth it. He would be immediately surrounded by a cleanup squad. He approached the girl, her name was Lisa, and added that the bald guy was clumsy and hard to handle, which made him angry. The girl pointed out that what worried her most was who the Lord would appoint as commander. She asked if she had to carry out that assassination mission they'd talked about before. The man with glasses sitting a bit farther away replied that no one had canceled the job. Blackfist frowned and commented that they didn't need to act themselves, but just needed a little intervention and that stopping Overlord Magao's death didn't make sense. Smoker laughed and pointed out that they only needed to add a perfect ingredient to the final challenge dungeon, the Ingwo incident, which once activated instantly raises the difficulty, catastrophic, and summons a boss. The bald guy asked why the Lord used such a valuable artifact, and what would happen if they all attacked at once. They would fail immediately. They called him an idiot and informed him that no one in the Alliance would just let him pass, even the assassination target. The young man stared at Black Fist and said he was eager to mess things up. Asked the guy not to get angry and asked the card player to understand this egghead. He frowned, squinted one eye, added that the bald guy had always been a bit slow on the uptake and just liked to act, and asked him why the card player was always teasing him. He replied that he couldn't tolerate fools, especially if he had to work with them, and Lord Megao had dragged the bald guy onto his team, so sooner or later it was going to backfire. Suddenly, the bald guy stood up, much to everyone's surprise, bowed, and apologized. Smoker told him not to apologize and pointed out that he was stronger than the card player and could do much more. When the green mist began to rise, the fox looked surprised, even opening her mouth in shock. The young men immediately stood up from their seats and all together started saluting the knight. Tot said that Medao had died and that he would appoint a new abyss demon to lead them, as well as a fallen as support. Realizing they had already heard the fallen's name, he hesitated a bit and said it was the White Jester, a smoker kneeling down. He said he had definitely heard the name before and added that White Jester not only destroyed more than a dozen high-level professionals, but also massacred a club with ordinary people over 1,000 dead. Those were his achievements. The knight was very surprised and asked if they weren't glad about his arrival. Smoker replied that he recognized White Jester's power and pointed out that what he was doing put their lives at risk, adding that he would refuse any operation if he came to Yancheng. The Lord laughed and said it was fine for them to have their opinions and added that his precious children had every right to reject him. He said White Jester had no authority to command them and wouldn't participate in their operations. He would arrive in the city to take over his previous mission, to kill Shangguan Yan. He added that the Abyss Demon would also turn his back on them in this new mission. The Lord said to bring Wan Xiaofeng to the dungeon, since he was an outstanding fallen and would be his trusted ally, then commented that after taking care of these things, they had to deal with Lin, the one who killed Megao, and added that the young men should remember not to reveal his identity or presence. The master told the young men to do everything following a pattern that the Insuo adventures would use in the final trial and added that the enraged boss would kill him so no one would know anything and let the professionals bitterly regret it. Smoker informed the Lord that he knew Lin had killed Lord Megao and asked if it was really worth spending an artifact that could permanently bring diamond-level gear for his sake. Blackfist laughed and said that when everyone got their diamond gear, the Lord would be able to kill anyone. The Lord listened as the guy with glasses said that even if Knight could kill Lord Megao, after all, he was only level 12, and then added that this guy's threat level was probably no higher than Shangguan Yan's. The spirit reported that the pathetic professional alliance was hiding everything, but he still got the information he needed, and realized that Lin had been admitted to the Forgotten Nest and his life was more important to the higher-ups than the sect leaders. He smiled ironically and observed that all those secretly protecting Shangguan Yan were now protecting the knight, and commented that if everyone attacked that guy, it was unlikely they could even hurt him. Some of the guys replied that they understood, and the Lord ordered them to complete the task and he would take them to the Abyss, where they would be purified. He continued that after that, they would become true warriors of the Abyss, but if they failed, they still weren't worthy of receiving the Abyss's deep power. The young men knelt before the master and said in unison that they would not fail and would carry out the order without fail. The man announced that Lin's disciple had defeated the Abyss Demon and the Alliance was awarding him a certificate of merit. One of the young men said this guy was a terror. He hit Wan, made his father apologize, and also killed the Abyss Demon himself. Some guy commented that Knight's ratings were now the best in the entire school. Someone said the boy would be first in the final trial, and Mumu sat down and smiled. Suddenly, the girl's expression changed as she heard the various gossip from the students. She suddenly realized that Lin was facing danger and she hadn't told him anything. She hoped the Alliance could protect the boy and keep the Abyss's forces steady. The school director handed our hero a diploma and said he was the pride of the school and the hope of the Alliance. The young man thanked him and said he wasn't worthy of such words, as every professional was the Alliance's hope to eradicate the Abyss forces. The elder gestured with his hand and realized there was platinum-level gear and skill books here, and Lin could take it all if he wanted. The students behind him were very surprised. The young man said it wasn't necessary to take everything, since many things wouldn't be useful, but he thought the moon's shadow and ancient dragon necklace were important and irreplaceable. He also noticed that the set of 4 items couldn't be separated and the platinum ring had no key attributes. The guy knew their gear lacked the active skill instant movement, but still didn't push him. Lena clenched her fist mentally and understood how tempting the platinum item's stats were. The young man scanned everything, calmed down a bit, and showed with his hand what he'd take: the Belt of Inspiration, Boots of Agility, and Holy Radiance. The Belt of Inspiration, as the description said, had a unique effect that increased healing and shields received. The Boots of Dexterity added percentages to agility, movement speed, and reduced slowdown effects by 25%. And the Holy Radiance book spent mana to heal an ally with a powerful flash of light, instantly restoring a lot of health and greatly boosting all stats. The guy smiled and thought if it wasn't for a white Sacred Rider skill, reversing the skill's effect could trigger a sudden rage mode and reduce all enemy stats. Our hero reached out to activate the skill book. That way, the young man thought the Boots of Dexterity combined with the ancient dragon necklace were perfect against dexterous bosses and nullified their stat weaknesses. The director said the award ceremony was over and everyone could leave, but reminded them they had to study for the exam. Ling Yu quietly said the Alliance had assigned people to protect him, and today's speech was to make everyone pay attention and not give the Abyss forces a chance to attack. The Elder realized the final class change exam was in 3 days and asked Knight what his plans were. He smiled and said he wanted to level up his gear to 10 and test his comrades. The director asked who exactly from his team would take the test, looked at the glowing bracelet, and told the boy to come with him because there was something to discuss. In the office, the Elder started reviewing documents and asked Lin if Mumu and Bai Ji were his teammates. He answered yes and added he wasn't worried about Mumu, but he was about Ji. Then he continued saying the girl's talent was hard to use and she was considering changing classes herself. The director smiled and commented that if a guy picked her for the team, she definitely had strengths. He laughed and informed them they couldn't get any special treatment on the exam. Then he added that if Bai passed, there would be no issues with her future path and she wouldn't have to worry about her studies. The Elder summarized that Knight had nothing to worry about. He just needed to focus on preparing the team. He agreed and handed over the papers. Our hero took them, pulled out a sheet. His pupils widened in astonishment. The director said it was a true reward for them. He paused and added that it was also part of the Professional Alliance's plan. After a while, Bai Ji was in the Lizard Dungeon. She was at level 1/10. Lin shouted that the attack range was normal and told her to trust her situational assessment. He added that her reaction time could still improve. The huge monster didn't think about stopping. It started attacking the girl. She dodged as best as she could. The attacks were very strong and intense. Knight watched her and shouted to not hesitate or dodge while choosing a very precise attack angle. So Bai gathered her strength and started attacking the massive monster that kept advancing toward her. After a few seconds, a message appeared saying the Goddess of Luck's gaze could be applied to only one target and granted a special buff. The girl smiled upon seeing the next notification, say that opening the last chest greatly increased the chances of getting the rarest gear or the skills that suited her best. Our hero looked at the girl and thought that this was a new ability Ji had gained after leveling up his talent to level 2. He realized this was very useful since it reduced the number of attempts before a guaranteed drop. It dramatically increased the chance of a platinum drop and eliminated drops of the wrong item class. The guy grabbed his head, realizing the girl had been hit with a personal passive effect no one else could use. The young man thought it over and concluded that in this regard, he was on equal footing with Bai. The girl approached him and informed him that she had her gear built and her new stats distributed following his advice. Lin replied that she was making great progress and if she didn't hesitate and followed orders, she could take it easy in the final trial. She took his hand, closed her eyes, blushed, and then let out a soft laugh. Our hero thought everything was going as expected. Everything felt a bit out there, but at first, he thought Bai had been chosen for the heavy sword class due to her innate strength. The boy approached the girl to ask if she was really ready to change classes. She blushed again, held her hands to her chest, and told him she was actually fine. She added that she really liked the heavy sword and asked if she was doing something wrong. The young man pointed to her wounds and said he knew she had built up a lot of strength points. He added that to become a good swordswoman, she hadn't just trained but tried everything she could, yet regarding her class, choice, and future, he told her straight up that her body wasn't naturally suited for the swordsman class and continuing down that path could cause bodily harm and permanent damage. Knight said she might keep up for a while, but in the end, she wouldn't be able to follow the path of a pro. Bai's pupils narrowed sharply, tears welled up, and she wanted to say something but couldn't. The guy said changing classes wasn't easy either. The challenge would be a high-difficulty single-player dungeon. He continued that only Bai would be able to enter it and noted he hadn't gone through it himself, so he couldn't offer any strategies, and she could end up seriously injured or broken. Lin smiled and said if Ji passed it, the fights would open up another side, and whatever her decision, she would remain part of his team. The girl lowered her head and started thinking about the captain and her teammates. She was well aware her skills very often only worked on herself. But despite everything, Nady and Mumu always treated her more sincerely, which flattered her a lot. Lin was silent for a moment and said they'd deal with this first, and then think about everything else. Bei clenched her fists and shouted that she had made up her mind and would take the class change trial. She put her hand to her head because she felt very dizzy. Jesus groaned that he was about to vomit. The young men approached Mumu, and she told them she'd been waiting for them here half the day. She crossed her arms over her chest and said the final challenge was tomorrow, and that as a team member, she couldn't even find her teammates. Knight handed her a kind of sheet and told her not to get mad because they had a surprise for her. He told the girl to look closely, and then she would understand everything. The professional trial arena was packed with a huge crowd. The students talked among themselves about their nerves. Some underestimated their abilities, while others bragged about their connections. Jimiro looked around and realized there was a huge crowd gathered. He was very surprised. Mumu approached the girl and asked if she was ready or not. Bei answered affirmatively. Suddenly, Sue and Knight heard someone calling them loudly and turned their heads. There were young people standing with a banner, shouting that they trusted Lin and Mumu would succeed. The boy asked if his uncles still hadn't found out. The girl smiled and said she couldn't tell them everything. The young man hesitated and said he thought they had other information channels. He added that it was a highly classified secret. The city governor entered the bridge, and everyone was glad about his unexpected appearance. The man greeted the students and said he had news to announce today. He informed them that the ongoing exam was postponed by 3 days. He paused for a moment and said there was a more important announcement about the reason for the trial's delay. The students started asking what had happened. Some wondered if the demon wave had gone away again. Everyone got very tense. They asked many questions and made different guesses. The city manager said today was famous because it's the day the city launches a special student project. He announced that, according to the Alliance's rules, each upcoming special student must complete a unique dungeon with their chosen team before the final challenge. He added that this dungeon challenge would be a final aptitude exam, broadcast live and recorded so all students could watch and learn. The city manager said the first special student from Yangcheng becomes a student of Lin's first professional academy. The man informed his opponent that Knight had suddenly been declared a special student and assigned a dungeon. It was a dungeon originally meant for a test. Smoker asked if Jinwoo's arrival was embedded in it. He answered yes and said everything felt too coincidental since they hadn't changed dungeons, which seemed suspicious. The glasses-wearing boy interrupted and said it didn't matter. They just needed to complete the boss's task, and the rest wasn't their concern. The card player frowned, and Smoker said his job was simply to confirm that Lin himself had entered the dungeon with the embedded artifact, and if there were no malfunctions inside, they had to return immediately to base. The guy replied it wouldn't fail since he activated the mechanism silently, and the city manager didn't notice a thing. Smoker pointed out to his opponent that the patrol professionals could sense his abyss aura. He also told Card Player that the guards might realize the dungeon's difficulty had changed, block the entire corridor, and then he'd be in trouble. But the boy calmly said he would leave as soon as he had to, since he was closely watching that side. He added that the target would soon enter the dungeon and asked how his teammates were doing. Smoker frowned and said that idiot, He Quan had handled Wan Xiaofeng and they had 0-1. He thought for a moment and added they still hadn't contacted Bai Ji. The card player said their priority was to eliminate Shangguan Yang.